Chapter 27-22. He he he. Situbai laughed. His laughter was very strange, even a little wretched. His pair of small eyes swept across Liangzhen and the other two, and said, "You three still recognize this old man." "Of course I recognize." Liangzhen's face was even uglier than a bitter gourd. He nodded and said, not daring to look at them. It was Situbai's gaze. "Senior Situ, why are you here?" "We are here to handle a small matter. We really didn't think that we would disturb you." Yu Lian's face was also bewildered. His face was smiling, but it was uglier than crying. "Small matter?" Situbai raised his eyebrows and smiled, and said, "What this old man saw just now was not a small matter. You two are really arrogant. Relying on your strength, you actually bullied two students who just entered the academy in front of so many people. Have you forgotten who you are? How are your actions befitting of a teacher? The face of our Saint Soul Academy has been lost by you." Sentence after sentence, each sentence was colder than the last. Liangzhen and the other two flushed red, trembling, not daring to let out a fart or breathe loudly. "You too." Then, Situbai didn't have any intention of stopping. He directly pointed at Liangzhen and Yu Lian and said, "Don't you think you are very strong? All right, then this old man will play with you. Come at me together." This. Liangzhen and Yu Lian's faces froze, and their faces were extremely ugly. QL11 At this moment, the surrounding people's gazes were all on Situbai, unable to conceal the horror in their eyes. Although they didn't know who Situbai was, they could guess that the latter's identity and strength were definitely not ordinary. Otherwise, Liangzhen and the other two wouldn't have such a trembling reaction. "What, are you afraid?" Situbai looked at Liangzhen and Yu Lian and smiled cold and said, "You guys weren't like this just now. Where did that awe-inspiring spirit go?" Senior Situ must be joking. "How would this junior dare to fight with you?" Yu Lian was still calm. He bowed and said carefully, "You don't dare to fight this old man?" Situbai sneered and said, "All right then, this old man will find someone who dares to make a move on you." As he spoke, he raised his hand and pointed at Nie Tian, saying, "Fight him." "Him?" Liangzhen and Yu Lian were stunned, and their eyes looked at Nie Tian in unison with extreme astonishment, and they even suspected that they'd heard wrongly. The others looked at Situbai with shock and astonishment. Who would have thought that Situbai would actually let Liangzhen and Yu Lian make a move against Nie Tian? Nie Tian's strength was not worth mentioning at all in front of Liangzhen and Yu Lian. It would not be an exaggeration to say that any one of them could kill Nie Tian with a flick of their fingers. No one understood what Situbai was trying to do. "Senior Situ, please don't joke around. Given our status, how could we fight him?" Yu Lian said with an unsightly expression on his face. "Do I look like I'm joking?" Situbai sneered and said, "Weren't you guys pretty straightforward just now? Why don't you want to fight now? Are you trying to save face now?" Liangzhen and Yu Lian had bitter expressions on their faces, and were speechless. "I'm not joking with you. Fight him now, and both of you." Situbai smiled strangely and said, "But before you make a move, you have to suppress your strength to peak paramount god. Fair enough, right?" With that, he looked at Nie Tian with a hint of a smile in his eyes. Nie Tian now understood that Situbai wanted Liangzhen and Yu Lian to suppress their strength to the same level as him, and then make a move. This. Liangzhen and Yu Lian had unsightly expressions and said, "Senior Situ, that's not good. There's nothing bad about it." Situbai smiled cold and said, "I'm stronger than you, so you can only listen to me." Liangzhen and Yu Lian had just said the same thing. Now that it came out of Situbai's mouth, it was very ironic. Liangzhen and Yu Lian looked at each other. They knew that they couldn't escape this battle, so they bowed and said, "Since Senior Situ has spoken, we'll do as you say. You don't have to be so polite. It'll be good enough if you don't cry after being beaten up by that kid." Situ Bai smiled faintly, as if he was very confident in Nye Tian. Liang Zhen and Yu Lian's eyes narrowed slightly. Although their expressions didn't change much, they didn't think much of it. From their point of view, even if they suppressed their strength to peak paramount god, they would still be able to crush Nye Tian. Powerful martial artists could deliberately suppress their strength, but even so, they were still far stronger than martial artists of the same level. Humph. Situ Bai smiled strangely, then looked at Nye Tian with a pair of fox-like eyes and asked, "Kid, are you all right?" "I'm fine." Nye Tian smiled faintly and said proudly, "As long as the two of them suppress their strength, I won't let you down, senior." How intelligent was he? How could he be unable to discern that Situ Batsi was using Liang Zhen and Yu Lian to probe his strength? The two of you listen carefully. Suppress your strength. If your cultivation is above peak paramount god, then don't blame this old man for being impolite. Situ Bai looked at Liang Zhen and Yu Lian and said cold, "You should know very well that with my status, no one will say anything if I kill two teachers of the inner yard." A threat, a blatant threat. Situ Bai's meaning was very clear. If Liang Zhen and Yu Lian used the strength of peak paramount god, then he would directly kill them. Liang Zhen and Yu Lian could sense the killing intent in Situ Bai's eyes, and they couldn't help but gasp, their eyes trembling slightly. The two of them had never imagined that Situ Bai would take this battle so seriously. Everyone was stunned, and their gazes became playful. There was going to be a good show to watch. "All right, let's begin." Situ Bai smiled faintly, and then he stepped back slightly. The others also stepped back, leaving enough space. Humph! Nye Tian took a step forward, and with a cold smile, he looked at Liang Zhen and Yu Lian and said in a deep voice, "Come at me together." As soon as he finished speaking, he stomped on the ground and soared into the sky. He was like a sharp sword that stood horizontally in midair, showing off his sharpness and sharpness. Liang Zhen and Yu Lian's eyes darkened when they saw Nye Tian's imposing manner, and their faces turned somewhat unsightly. Nye Tian's strength was beyond their expectations. "Not bad, kid." Situ Batsi looked at Nye Tian with a faint smile, his cloudy eyes filled with burning anticipation. "I can't believe you've reached the pinnacle of sword and martial arts." In the next moment, Liang Zhen and Yu Lian flew up and formed a triangle, facing off against Nye Tian. Chapter 27-23. Boom! As soon as Nye Tian finished speaking, an enormous sword aura surged out from his body and surged between the heavens and the earth, causing him to look like a sharp sword that stood proudly between the heavens and the earth. What a powerful sword aura! The crowd was shocked when they sensed Nye Tian's sword aura. The sword aura that Nye Tian was displaying right now didn't seem like something a peak paramount god should have. Arrogant! Seeing this, Liang Zhen let out a low roar. His short and fat body trembled slightly. Instantly, waves of violent energy were released, surging wildly in the void. Like a stormy sea, it burst out layer by layer. "Kid, even though we've suppressed our strength, you still can't fight against us." Yu Lian's voice sounded almost at the same time. His voice was as cold as ice, and his aura was blazing like fire. He was like an exploding sun, constantly releasing terrifying fire energy. Hua! In the next moment, Liang Zhen directly attacked. He slammed his palm down, and the surging force was like a huge wave, constantly rushing over. The void trembled slightly, and there seemed to be the sound of waves crashing in the air. Boom! At the same time, Yu Lian also attacked. After his palm landed, a sea of flames appeared in the sky. The surging flames swallowed the tongues of fire, spreading continuously, and enveloping Nye Tian. The scene in midair caused the crowd's eyes to tremble. Liang Zhen and Yu Lian were really shameless. They joined forces to fight against Nye Tian, and they actually took the initiative to attack first. It was obvious that the two of them wanted to defeat Nye Tian in one move. Not only did they want to win, but they wanted to win beautifully. After all, with their status, if they lost, or if they had to spend a lot of effort to win, it would be equivalent to losing face. Is that all? Nie Tian stood in midair, the corners of his mouth curled up in a cold smile, and the starlight heaven slash appeared in his hand. The sword will around him surged, and at the same time, the fiend god energy was released madly. The sword will in the void rumbled, like the mournful wailing of doomsday. It was extremely terrifying. Nie Tian was really angry. He wanted to defeat Liang Zhen and Yu Lian with one sword. The crowd below felt the sword intent surrounding Nie Tian and was dumbfounded. No one could imagine that Nie Tian was actually so powerful. The sword will Nie Tian was releasing was so terrifying that it was almost impossible to believe that he was only a peak paramount god. Earth sword, devouring moon. Right at this moment, Nie Tian's voice rang out, resonating through the void like a thunderclap that was forceful and vigorous. Boom! Boom! In the next moment, two sword shadows appeared at the same time. They were like raging dragons in the sea, and their terrifying auras engulfed the heavens and the earth. So strong. Everyone was once again shocked by the scene in front of them, and they all cried out in surprise. Not only was Nie Tian's sword intent powerful and terrifying, but his control over it was also extremely shocking. He was actually able to split his sword into two, and each sword still maintained a terrifying might. Oh no! Liang Zhen and Yu Lian's eyes trembled at the same time as they realized that something was wrong. At this moment they could clearly feel the terrifying sword intent, and their hearts were filled with fear. Only now did they realize that although Nie Tian only had the strength of a peak paramount god, his battle prowess was comparable to a peak god-state martial artist. Boom! Boom! Immediately after, two explosions sounded in the air. Liang Zhen and Yu Lian's attacks were directly crushed by the sword shadows, and they disappeared in the air. The two sword shadows were extremely terrifying, like raging dragons, as if they were going to devour Liang Zhen and Yu Lian. Bang! Bang! In the next moment, under the gaze of countless eyes, two figures were sent flying, leaving two bloody trails in the air. This scene caused everyone's expression to stiffen, and their expressions to freeze. With one sword strike, Nie Tian defeated Liang Zhen and Yu Lian with an overwhelming momentum. QL11 This was a result that no one could have imagined. Before Nie Tian fought with Liang Zhen and Yu Lian, everyone guessed that the result of the battle would most likely be Nie Tian's defeat. It was already very good for Nie Tian to be able to withstand a few moves from Liang Zhen and Yu Lian. But now, such a scene simply blinded everyone's eyes. The terror of Nie Tian was far beyond their imagination. At this moment, even Situ Bai was stunned. His old face was lifeless, and his lips were trembling as if he wanted to say something, but he couldn't say anything. He knew that Nie Tian's battle prowess was shocking, but he didn't expect it to reach such a terrifying level. His prediction of the result was that Nie Tian would just barely defeat Liang Zhen and Yu Lian, and it definitely wouldn't be a crushing defeat. Is this all you've got? What a mess! In midair, Nie Tian took a step forward, and sword intent surged around his body, as if a sword god had descended, and his aura covered the sky. Liang Zhen and Yu Lian steadied themselves, and the blood on their bodies scattered. Although they weren't heavily injured, they were in a sorry state. Two inner yard teachers, in front of so many people, lost to a student who just got what he wanted. This time, their faces were thrown back into their mother's womb. At this moment, the two's eyes were dark and fierce, and there was a hint of coldness in them. It was obvious that they were furious. If Situ Bai wasn't here, they would definitely attack and kill Nie Tian. But now they didn't dare to. We lost. Yu Lian was still calm. He knew that after suppressing his strength, he wasn't Nie Tian's opponent, so he said and prepared to leave. Liang Zhen didn't say anything, and he turned around and left. Wait! But at this moment, Situ Bai's voice rang out. Senior Situ, Do you have any other instructions? Liang Zhen and Yu Lian's figures froze. Although they were furious in their hearts, they still maintained a respectful attitude and bowed. Pass a message to the person behind you. This old man will find a teacher for that little girl. He doesn't need to worry. Situ Bai's lips curled up and he said indifferently. Liang Zhen and Yu Lian's faces darkened. They clearly didn't expect Situ Bai to be so direct. Why? Didn't you hear what I said? Situ Bai smiled coldly and said in a deep voice. We understand. Liang Zhen and Yu Lian bowed slightly, and their faces were extremely ugly. It's good that you understand. Fram. Situ Bai waved his hand, indicating that Liang Zhen and Yu Lian could leave. Those who are unrelated leave. After Liang Zhen and Yu Lian left, Situ Bai spoke coldly. His voice wasn't loud, but when it fell into everyone's ears, it was like thunder, deafening. Everyone reacted and immediately dispersed. The birds and beasts were gone. Senior Situ, I really didn't know. Bai Ruoju didn't leave. She stood there with a troubled expression and said in astonishment. All right, you should leave too. In the future, be smarter when you do things. Don't be someone else's chess piece without knowing it. Situ Bai waved his hand and let Bai Ruoju leave. Bai Ruoju had a puzzled expression, but she didn't say anything and turned to leave. In a moment, everyone had left. Only Nie Tian, Jun Aoqing, and Situ Bai were left. Junior Nie Tian thanks Senior Situ for your help. Nie Tian took a step forward and bowed to Situ Bai, expressing his gratitude. Chapter 27-24. Entrusted by someone? Nie Tian narrowed his eyes when he heard Situ Bai's words. I was entrusted by someone. Situ Bai smiled faintly and said, For the time being, I'll be responsible for your safety at Saint Soul Academy. Nie Tian frowned and could already guess what was going on. He guessed that the one who entrusted Situ Bai was Huairu. He had just arrived at Saint Soul Academy and did not know anyone else. Only Huairu would do his best to protect him. Moreover, Situ Bai's status was terrifyingly high. He was definitely not someone that anyone could invite. Little fella, don't let your guard down. I am only responsible for the truly terrifying fellows. As for the small fries, I will not touch them. Situ Bai smiled and said, I understand. Nie Tian nodded and smiled faintly. He knew that although Situ Bai would protect him, he would not stay by his side all the time. Moreover, with Situ Bai's status, he could not make a move most of the time. For example, if Nie Tian met a provocateur like Tian Zhuowen, Situ Bai would definitely not make a move. But then again, if Nie Tian could not even deal with a small fry like Tian Zhuowen, there was no value in protecting him. No matter what, I still have to thank you, Senior. Nie Tian bowed again to express his gratitude. It was indeed very dangerous just now. If Situ Bai had not appeared, Nie Tian and Jun Aoqing would have been in danger. After calming down, Nie Tian asked with a slight frown, Senior, what do you mean when you said there's someone behind those teachers? When Liang Zhen and the others left just now, Situ Bai asked them to pass a message to the person behind them. Nie Tian, you are so smart. Don't tell me you didn't notice anything. Situ Bai laughed with a strange expression. Please explain, Senior. Nie Tian bowed slightly and said respectfully. In fact, he did notice that Liang Zhen and the others did not come with good intentions. They did not seem to be here to accept disciples. If Zhang Xian was sincere in taking Zhang Xian in as his disciple, he wouldn't have forced him to such an extent. Even if the two sides were to fall out, there was no need for them to make a move. After all, this was the academy. Nie Tian, you should be able to tell that these guys are actually here for Jun Aoqing. Situ Bai sighed softly. What do you mean? Nie Tian frowned in confusion. You have already seen the dean, right? Situ Bai's weathered face darkened as he said, Then there are some things that I will say directly. As he spoke, he looked at Nie Tian with a heavy gaze and said in a deep voice, If I'm not wrong, These people were sent by the dean. Perhaps the dean didn't personally make an appearance, but it was definitely the dean's intention. My goal is simple. I don't want June Ouching to stay by your side. At the same time, I want to control June Ouching. Why? Nye Tian went blank for a moment, confused. The reason is very simple. You can figure it out yourself. Situ Bai's face darkened as he asked, "What kind of person does the dean want you to become?" Nye Tian frowned and immediately recalled the scene of meeting with Dean Saint Soul. He was very clear that Dean Saint Soul wanted to turn him into a sharp blade, a tool. To put it more bluntly, he wanted to turn him into an obedient dog. Letting June Ouching leave you is because he doesn't want her to affect your growth. Seeing Nye Tian's expression change, Situ Bai said, "And once June Ouching really acknowledges a master, it's equivalent to being controlled. This is also very advantageous for controlling you in the future." I understand. Nye Tian's brows furrowed, his face incomparably gloomy. After listening for so long, if he still could not figure it out, he would really be too stupid. Liang Zhen and the others were not here to accept disciples at all, but were sent by Dean Saint Soul. Dean Saint Soul must have felt that June Ouching following by Nye Tian's side would affect Nye Tian's growth. Moreover, Dean Saint Soul also wanted to control June Ouching so that he could better control Nye Tian in the future. What a good Dean Saint Soul, planning everything now. Nye Tian thought through everything, his heart sank and his eyes became stern. He had already accepted the Saint Soul curse mark, but Dean Saint Soul was still not at ease and wanted to completely control him. Nye Tian, it's good that you can understand these things. Situ Bai opened his mouth and said, "Since the dean doesn't want June Ouching to stay by your side, then he will definitely think of other ways to keep her away from you. Rather than that, it's better to let June Ouching leave your side directly. You can also have no worries in your heart and focus on cultivation." This. When Nye Tian heard Situ Bai's words, his expression was a little awkward, and he could not help but look at June Ouching. "Nye Tian, I can leave with this senior." June Ouching looked at Nye Tian and said with a nod. She was a smart person and could see that Nye Tian's current situation was very bad. If she continued to follow by Nye Tian's side, she would only become the latter's burden and drag the latter down. In fact, she had the heaven-rank Saint Soul Jade token on her, and could have directly entered the inner court, but she did not want to leave Nye Tian, so she chose to stay in the outer court. But now, she had to leave Nye Tian. Ouching I. Nye Tian looked at June Ouching and felt a deep sense of powerlessness. His beloved women left one by one, all because he was too weak and could not protect them. At this moment, his heart was in pain, as if it was being cut by a knife. "Nye Tian, don't worry, I have already found a suitable teacher for June Ouching. That person will be here soon." Situ Bai said in a deep voice, "As long as June Ouching stays by that person's side, even if the dean personally takes action, he will not be able to take her away." Now? Nye Tian frowned and looked at June Ouching with an even more reluctant gaze. This dean is despicable. He will do whatever he wants to do, so we must let June Ouching leave as soon as possible. Situ Bai nodded slightly, and his expression was not good. At this time, he appeared to publicly protect Nye Tian, which was actually breaking off relations with the dean of the Saint Soul Academy. The Saint Soul Academy might not be peaceful in the future. All right. In the end, Nye Tian nodded. At this moment, the void shook slightly, and two figures descended from the sky. One of the figures was very familiar to Nye Tian. It was Huairu. The other figure was an old woman, with a stooped figure, leaning on a black walking stick. Her eyes were glowing, as if she could see through everything. "Elder Hua." Seeing Huairu again, Nye Tian's eyes lit up and he shouted, "Nye Tian, let me introduce you, this is Granny Tang, one of the 3 elders of the Saint Soul Academy." Huairu smiled faintly, took a step forward, and introduced her to Nye Tian. "This junior greets Granny Tang." Nie Tian bowed slightly, respectfully. He knew that this Granny Tang was Jun Aoqing's teacher. Like Situ Bai, Granny Tang was also one of the 3 elders of the Saint Soul Academy, and her strength was not inferior to Situ Bai. Chapter 27-25. A big gift. It was obvious that Granny Tang was very satisfied with Jun Aoqing. Nie Tian was relieved to see Granny Tang's reaction. Jun Aoqing, take her as your master. Huairu stepped forward and gestured for Jun Aoqing to take her as her master. Granny Tang was one of the strongest in the entire sacred spirit domain. In order to invite this old woman, he had to use a huge favor from a long time ago. Moreover, Granny Tang had said that it was up to her to decide whether or not to take her as a disciple. She was very satisfied and considered it an opportunity for Jun Aoqing. No need. Jun Aoqing took a step forward, and just as she was about to become his disciple, she was stopped by Grandma Tang. The latter laughed and said, "This old woman doesn't care about that kind of etiquette. I see her as a disciple, and she treats me like a teacher." The corners of Nie Tian's mouth curled into a faint smile when he heard Granny Tang's words. This old woman had quite a personality. Although Granny Tang ignored Nie Tian, he didn't care as long as she treated Jun Aoqing well. "Thank you, master." Jun Aoqing was quick to respond. She bowed and thanked Granny Tang. "Let's go." Granny Tang nodded. She took a step forward and left with Jun Aoqing. Nie Tian was stunned. Before he could react, Granny Tang and Jun Aoqing were gone. "Nie Tian, don't be offended. This old woman has always been swift and decisive. She has been like this for hundreds of thousands of years." Situ Bai smiled awkwardly. Nie Tian smiled. He couldn't help but feel a sense of loss. He did not know when the next time he would see Jun Aoqing would be. Granny Tang left in a hurry. She didn't even give Nie Tian a chance to say goodbye. "Nie Tian, don't worry. Jun Aoqing is very safe with Mrs. Tang." Huairu stepped forward and patted Nie Tian's shoulder, feeling a little guilty. He had brought Nie Tian to the sacred soul domain, but the series of events that followed had far exceeded his expectations and caught him unprepared. Fortunately, there was still Situ Bai and the others. Otherwise, Nie Tian's situation would be very dangerous. "Brother Situ, it's all thanks to you this time." At that moment, Huairu looked at Situ Bai and nodded heavily. "There's no need to be so polite between us. Besides, if it weren't for you back then, how could there be the Situ clan today?" Situ Bai laughed, but then his face became gloomy again. There was an unconcealable worry in his eyes. "Kuyo Oniguchi, as expected, you still have to take this step." After a long time, Situ Bai frowned and sighed in his heart. Kuyo Oniguchi was the name of Holy Soul Dean. It seemed that Situ Bai knew some of Kuyo Oniguchi's secrets. "Brother Situ, the matter has been settled. Let's leave first." Huairu didn't want to stay here any longer, as if he was afraid of being seen. "Okay." Situ Bai nodded slightly, then looked at Nie Tian and said, "Nie Tian, it's your first time coming to the Holy Soul Academy. As a senior, this old man should give you some gift. How about this, you rest for a few days first. When you're fully recovered, come to the Holy Soul mountain range to find me. I'll give you a big gift." This isn't too good. Nie Tian was stunned for a moment. He was a little embarrassed, but his eyes were shining. "What's not good about it? Quickly thank Brother Situ." Huairu was also stunned for a moment, but then he reacted and hurriedly gave Nie Tian a look. With Situ Bai's status and strength, if he said that he would give Nie Tian a big gift, it would definitely be something unexpected. Nie Tian thanks Senior Situ. Nie Tian quickly nodded and bowed to express his thanks. "It's too early to thank me. It's hard to say how much strength you'll get when the time comes." Situ Bai laughed, then he didn't stay any longer. His figure moved and directly left. Huairu also left after saying goodbye to Nie Tian. Nie Tian looked at the place where the two figures disappeared. he couldn't help but reveal a worried expression on his face. This Holy Soul Academy was more complicated than he had imagined. On his first day at the academy, Nye Tian felt that he had fallen into a boundless whirlpool. If he wanted to get out of this whirlpool, he could only quickly improve his strength. Next, Nye Tian didn't stay any longer. He quickly returned to his courtyard 1414. After entering his room, he let out a long breath and forced himself to calm down. He didn't expect Jun Ouching to leave unexpectedly. Next, he had to improve his strength even faster. Fat, how's the Holy Soul Curse Seal in my body? At this time, Nye Tian suddenly thought of the Holy Soul Curse Seal and couldn't help but frown and ask. The Holy Soul Curse Mark is very strange. Ever since it fused with your martial body, there has been no more aura. I can't even feel the existence of the Holy Soul Curse Mark now. Little Fat Cat's face was ugly as it said with a smile. Nye Tian's face darkened. He couldn't say anything for a long time. At this time, Ghost Emperor also didn't say anything. It seemed that he also couldn't do anything about the Holy Soul Curse Seal. Before Nye Tian had fused with the Holy Soul Seal, the two of them had sworn that the seal would be a piece of cake. But now they didn't say anything and pretended to be mute. Didn't they cause trouble for Nye Tian? Nye Tian, you don't have to worry. Fat Cat knew what Nye Tian was thinking. He chuckled and said, right now, the Holy Soul Curse Seal doesn't harm you at all. Instead, it's beneficial to your cultivation. When the Holy Soul Curse Seal acts up, this deity will definitely be able to see some clues. As he spoke, Fat Cat unconsciously looked at his butt. His eighth tail was about to grow out. Nye Tian was taken aback, and his expression turned grim. When it happens, if he really waited until the Holy Soul Curse Seal acted up, wouldn't it be too late? But now, Nye Tian had no other choice. He could only wait. Next, Nye Tian took out the 9 Extremes War God Art. He even carefully sensed it. After confirming that the martial art in his hand was a high-grade divine rank, he couldn't help but frown. The 9 Extremes War God Art that he cultivated was clearly a pseudo-divine rank. But the 9 Extremes War God Art in his hand was actually a high-grade divine rank. It was too strange. How could there be 2 different ranks for the same martial art? Actually, there's nothing strange about it. At this time, Little Fat Cat's voice rang out. It chuckled and said, martial arts are created after a martial artist has infused their martial intent into it. The grade of a martial art is related to the martial artist's strength and comprehension of the martial way. The person who left behind the 9 Extremes War God Art probably had the same experience as you, slowly working his way up from a planar world. Therefore, he left behind different ranks of the 9 Extremes War God Art at different times. Is that really the case? Nye Tian frowned. He couldn't help but feel that Fat Cat's words were a little mysterious. It was too much of a coincidence that he encountered the same martial art left behind by the same person. Why do you care so much? Hurry up and fuse with the martial art in your hand. Fat Cat didn't want to say too much to Nye Tian. Nye Tian looked at the martial art in his hand and nodded slightly. He was now a peak paramount god, and the pseudo-divine rank 9 Extremes War God Art wasn't enough for him. Taking a deep breath, Nye Tian unfurled the martial art scroll, and a wave of martial intent poured out, enveloping him and pouring into him. Chapter 27-26. Caught in danger, huh? Nye Tian felt a terrifying power appear. His face darkened as he exclaimed. Then, he felt the power turn into an endless stream of sweet spring water that flowed through every meridian and every inch of bone in his body. This feeling was inexplicably refreshing, as if he had been struck by lightning. Immediately after, he felt his body rumble. The 9 dragon veins were resonating with each other. The dragon's roar was like a thunderclap, ringing endlessly. This strange refreshing feeling made Nye Tian's eyes shine with a strange light. He could feel his meridian, flesh, and bones being tempered and upgraded. But at this moment, he suddenly cried out in shock. He seemed to see a pair of giant eyes staring at him, releasing an incomparably strong pressure. In an instant, Nye Tian wanted to open his eyes, but he was shocked to find that he had lost control of his body. He could not open his eyes at all. What's going on? The sudden change made Nye Tian's heart sink. Boom. However, in the next moment, his spiritual consciousness unexpectedly entered an empty space. In the boundless space there was nothing at all. After a long time, spots of light appeared in the air. Then, they continuously gathered and quickly formed a giant. Gazing at the giant, Nye Tian exclaimed inwardly, "The Nine Transcendent's true form!" Rumble. And at this moment the giant suddenly expanded. Its body became bigger and bigger, until it was truly indomitable. Nye Tian felt his body being squeezed by a huge force, and his divine sense began to slowly blur. At the last moment, he only remembered that the giant filled the entire world, and he also fell into a coma. When he opened his eyes again, it was already a day later. What's going on? Nye Tian stood up in the room, feeling a burst of energy in his body. His face was filled with confusion. Fusing martial arts techniques was originally a very simple matter. Why did he enter an empty space for no reason? And what was the giant that appeared in that space? There were many things that Nye Tian could not understand. It seemed like the Nine Extremities War God art wasn't as simple as Fat Cat had said. At this moment, Nye Tian sensed his body and was stunned. He was shocked to discover that his Nine Extremes War God art had actually returned to the first level, the golden yellow sky realm. How is this possible? Nye Tian was stunned and his face was filled with shock. He had painstakingly cultivated the Nine Extremes War God art to the 9th level. Now, he had actually returned to the first level. How could he accept this? Nye Tian, don't panic. Release your aura first and feel it. At that moment, Fat Cat's voice rang out, reminding Nye Tian. Nye Tian nodded. He forced himself to calm down and unleashed his golden pole yellow sky armor. Golden armor covered his body, making him look like a golden giant. So powerful! Sensing the aura of the golden pole yellow sky armor, Nye Tian could not help but be stunned and astonished. He discovered that although the Nine Extremities War God art had returned to the first level, the aura of the first level was even stronger than when he was at the 9th level. It seemed like after the Nine Extremities War God art's level had increased, its power had also undergone a qualitative change. Very good. Understanding dawned on Nye Tian. He laughed heartily, and his eyes flickered with a fierce light. He could feel that his current battle prowess had increased quite a bit compared to a day ago. Following this, he did not go out. Instead, he sat cross-legged on the ground and began to carefully comprehend the Nine Extremities War God art. 3 days later, Nye Tian stood up once again. His entire person was on full display, and his aura was as sharp as a sword. 3 days of hard cultivation had allowed him to have a new understanding of the Nine Extremities War God art. At the same time, his strength had also increased. It seemed like there were faint signs of breaking through to the peak of half-step. He believed that as long as he could break through to the peak of half-step, he would be invincible in the godly state. However, at this moment, he felt that he had reached a bottleneck. It was not an easy task to break through to the peak of half-step. It's time to look for Senior Situ. I wonder what kind of gift he has prepared for me. Nye Tian smiled faintly and prepared to look for Situ Bai. He was looking forward to the gift that Situ Bai was going to give him. Following this, Nye Tian walked out of the courtyard and headed straight for the Saint Soul mountain range. The entire Saint Soul Academy was built on the Saint Soul mountain range. The Saint Soul mountain range was extremely vast. It stretched for tens of thousands of miles, with towering trees and countless strange peaks. After entering the Saint Soul mountain range, Nye Tian asked around and headed for Situ Bai's Baggy Peak. About half an hour later, he arrived outside a valley. After this valley, it's Baggy Peak. Looking at the valley in front of him, Nye Tian smiled faintly and prepared to enter. However, at this moment, he suddenly sensed something and his expression changed. In the next moment, Nye Tian smiled faintly and his lips curled into a cold arc as he said, "Come out." Just as he landed, 4 figures appeared, descended from the sky, and surrounded him. Among the 4, Nye Tian was very familiar with one of them. It was Tian Zhuowen. The other 3 were martial artists in black. They looked like venomous wolves as they stared at Nye Tian. "It seems that I was too careless." Nye Tian looked at Tian Zhuowen and the others and smiled bitterly. He was too excited just now. He was thinking about Situ Bai's gift and did not notice that someone was following him. "Nye Tian, I have waited for you for 4 days. You finally show yourself." Tian Zhuowen smiled coldly. His eyes were filled with killing intent. He had waited outside Nye Tian's courtyard for 4 days. Finally, his hard work paid off. He had waited for an opportunity. "Young Master Tian, you do not dare to deal with Feng Qi, so you can only deal with me, right?" Nye Tian smiled faintly, not nervous at all. "Brat, Feng Qi is a member of the Feng clan. This young master cannot afford to offend him. However, you are different. This young master has already asked around. You do not have any faction backing you. So, you will die today." Tian Zhuowen smiled coldly. His eyes were cold and filled with killing intent. Nye Tian smiled faintly and said with a playful expression, "It's true that I don't have anyone to rely on, but I'm still Feng Qi's friend. Aren't you afraid that he'll come after you for killing me? You came here alone. No one knows. Do you think this young master will be afraid?" Tian Zhuowen smiled coldly, revealing his killing intent. "Looks like you have everything planned out." Nye Tian raised his eyebrows and smiled. Then, he glanced at Tian Zhuowen and the others and said, "But can you really kill me?" These people in front of him, including Tian Zhuowen, were all peak immortal state martial artists. With such strength, it would be difficult to kill Nye Tian. However, just as Nye Tian's figure landed, an eerie voice was heard. "What if I join you?" The voice was cold and murderous, with a hint of hoarseness. Immediately after, a figure appeared in midair, staring down at Nye Tian with an incomparably cold and evil look in his eyes. A half-saint expert. Nye Tian looked at the figure in the sky and couldn't help but frown as he exclaimed in his heart. The person in front of him was actually a half-saint expert. With Nye Tian's current strength, he could easily fight against a peak immortal state martial artist. However, a half-saint expert could not be compared to a peak immortal state martial artist. It was not an exaggeration to say that there was a huge difference between a half-saint and a peak immortal state martial artist. Chapter 27:27. You're too weak. Nye Tian's eyes narrowed as he looked at the half-saint. If it was only a peak stage godly state expert, then he wouldn't be afraid even if there were 8 or 10 of them. But a half-saint expert was very troublesome to him. "Stinking brat, are you afraid?" "Ha!" Tian Zhuowen laughed out loud when he saw Nye Tian's reaction. He said coldly, "You're dead today." "Really?" Nye Tianling laughed as a pair of astral soul wings appeared on his back. With a flicker of his silhouette, he transformed into a beam of light that shot out explosively towards Tian Zhuowen. As the saying goes, capture the ringleader. As long as he could control Tian Zhuowen, that half-saint expert would feel fearful and not dare to make a move. Tian Zhuowen suddenly felt a cold qi attack him. He frowned slightly and exclaimed in surprise. But in the next moment, he did not panic. Waves of terrifying power surged out of his body and formed a greenish-black cauldron around him. It enveloped and protected his entire body. Boom! At the same time, the greenish-black cauldron suddenly shook and released a powerful force. Immediately, the void trembled and a terrifying force surged in all directions like a raging wave. Nye Tian was in the air. When he saw this scene, he couldn't help but narrow his eyes. He slashed out with his sword and a 1,000-meter-long sword shadow appeared. It was like a gigantic dragon that swept over. At the same time, his figure suddenly retreated and then froze in the air. Boom! The violent sword shadows blasted over in a frenzy, but when they came into contact with the greenish-black cauldron, they shattered inch by inch, as if they had been minced into pieces, turning into sword intent and dissipating. Bloodline power. Nye Tian steadied his body, his eyes suddenly focused, and shouted in a low voice. "Humph." Tian Zhuowen sneered and looked provocatively at Nye Tian, saying, "You're looking down on this young master too much, you brat. This young master's 9 heavens profound cauldron isn't what you can imagine." Nye Tian frowned. His expression was somewhat ugly. He had indeed underestimated Tian Zhuowen. Tian Zhuowen's profound 9th heaven cauldron bloodline was extremely strange. The power of his bloodline could condense into a huge cauldron, greatly increasing his defensive power. Even though Tian Zhuowen was only at the peak of the god-rank realm, he relied on the 9th heaven dark cauldron to block the attacks of a half-saint head-on. Nye Tian's attack just now, in front of the 9 heaven profound cauldron, did not pose any threat at all. However, in the next moment, Nye Tian calmed down. Tian Zhuowen was the martialist who had activated the Sacred Soul Steel's Scarlet Light Pillar. How could such a person not have a powerful trump card? "Brat, since you dare to attack this young master, then this young master will play with you." Following that, Tian Zhuowen let out a cold laugh as his aura skyrocketed once more. Something extremely strange happened. Under the stimulation of the extremely violent power of the bloodline, Tian Zhuowen's martial body actually underwent a transformation. His body expanded and his arms became like a violent ape, making him look like a demon god. "I didn't expect this guy's martial body to be so strong." Nye Tian frowned as he was slightly surprised. "Die!" At that moment, Tian Zhuowen let out a furious roar and threw a wild punch at Nye Tian. With a whistling sound, a terrifying fist shadow shot towards Nye Tian like a hurricane. Nye Tian's expression changed slightly. Then, he took a step forward and punched out as well. Bang! In the next moment, the two fists collided. It was as if two boulders had collided with each other. A muffled explosion was heard as a terrifying force surged in the air. Nye Tian and Tian Zhuowen's figures retreated a few hundred meters at the same time and then stood still at the same time. The other surrounding martialists were stunned by the scene in front of them. The Tian family's martialists had always been known for their strong martial bodies. Tian Zhuowen's martial body was even stronger than other martialists of the same level. Yet, Nye Tian was able to face him head-on without suffering any losses. It was too terrifying. "How is this possible?" Tian Zhuowen exclaimed in shock as he looked at Nye Tian in disbelief. He clearly did not expect Nye Tian's martial body to be so strong. "Do you think that only your martial body is strong?" Nye Tianling laughed as the 9 dragon veins in his body revolved crazily. Dragon chi filled his entire body. Combined with the first level of the 9 gods of war art, he could explode with terrifying power at any time. "You're courting death." Tian Zhuowen roared angrily as he was mocked. Then, the aura around him rose once again. However, there was not much change. He had already pushed the power of his martial body to the limit. "I'll kill you with one punch." Tian Zhuowen was enraged. He roared and punched out violently. The fist shadow whistled like a dragon, causing the ground beneath his feet to crack. "Do you think I'm afraid of you?" Seeing this, Nye Tian was not afraid at all. His eyes darkened as he released all the dragon chi in his body and punched out. Roar! Wherever the fist passed, a dragon's roar could be heard. Then, a crimson dragon appeared. The powerful dragon's might shook the heavens and the earth as it charged towards Tian Zhuowen. "This guy is so strong." The other martial artists were stunned by the scene before them. Their eyes trembled as they exclaimed. The shadow of a dragon that was thousands of meters long had appeared in front of Nie Tian's fist strike. How terrifying! Bang! Rumble! In the next moment, the two fists collided with each other. The space shook and the ground cracked. Endless waves of energy surged out, wreaking havoc in the air. Ah! In an instant, Tian Zhuowen let out a cry of agony. Then, his body was sent flying, smashing through countless trees in the air. On the other hand, Nie Tian was as steady as a mountain. He did not move an inch. The others were shocked by the sight before them, and they sucked in a mouthful of cold air. Young master! After a few seconds, one of them finally reacted. With a shout, he flew toward Tian Zhuowen's direction. Get lost! Tian Zhuowen had already stood up. When he saw his subordinate flying towards him, he roared and slapped him. Half of the guy's face swelled up in midair. Brat, why is your martial body so strong? Tian Zhuowen's eyes were bloodshot as he stared at Nie Tian as if he was going to skin him alive. You're too weak. Nie Tianling replied coldly. Then, he turned to the half-sacred expert and said, It's your turn. Brat, you're indeed a genius. The half-sacred expert narrowed his eyes and said in a cold tone, It's a pity that you've met me. As soon as he finished speaking, he moved his body and released all the power in his body, causing the ground beneath him to split open. A half-sacred expert really is strong, Nie Tian thought. His expression darkened and his heart sank. The man's aura was many times stronger than Tian Zhuowen's when he unleashed the power of his bloodline. Nie Tian could easily defeat Tian Zhuowen, but defeating this half-sacred expert wouldn't be easy. Kid, make your move. Considering that you're only a peak paramount god, I'll let you have the first 3 moves. His voice was calm and insufferably arrogant. Chapter 27-28. The Might of a Half-Saint 3 Moves? Nie Tian couldn't help but chuckle coldly. Sure. As soon as he finished speaking, he immediately moved. Starlight Heaven Slash abruptly appeared in his hand. Killing sword essence gushed out and condensed into an invisible sword shadow that attacked the half-saint expert. The others were stunned by the scene in front of them, and their eyes widened in shock. No one had expected Nie Tian's attack to be so fast and unpredictable. Nie Tian had used the Darkstar Ghost Kill to launch a sneak attack on the half-saint. This wasn't the time to talk about morality. Furthermore, the half-saint was here to kill Nie Tian, so there was no need for Nie Tian to be straightforward. Bang! In the next moment, a muffled bang resounded through space, and then the shapeless sword suddenly stopped a few hundred meters away from the half-saint before it collapsed into pieces. However, the half-saint's body also swayed a little. The half-saint's eyes narrowed, and he looked at Nie Tian with a strange expression. He hadn't expected Nie Tian's sword intent to be so sharp. Although the sword didn't injure him, it had forced him to sway a little, which was terrifying. After all, Nie Tian was only a peak paramount god. The half-saint speculated in his heart that if Nie Tian's cultivation base was the same as his, then he would have already become a corpse after that sword strike. One move. The half-saint retracted his surprised expression, and the corners of his mouth twitched. Use your second move, he said cold. Sure. Nie Tian's eyes were filled with killing intent, and he smiled coldly. He shot up into the sky, sword intent surging around him, and the fiend god energy inside of him surged. The terrifying fiend god sword intent flowed around him in an extremely violent manner. The half-saint expert's eyes narrowed when he sensed the sword aura in the sky, and he secretly released an even more violent force. Ji Chun, don't underestimate him. Hurry up and kill him, Tian Zhuowen shouted from the other side. He could no longer stand it. So this half-saint was called Ji Chun. But Ji Chen's face was as gloomy as water, as if he didn't hear Tian Zhuowen's words at all. Human sword, star cutting. High up in the sky, Nietion's eyes darkened as he spoke in a cold voice. Sword shadows instantly condensed around him as the starlight heavenly slashed down furiously. The fiend god sword shadows were like dragons as they pressed towards Ji Chun. Boom! The sword shadow whistled through the air, emitting a terrifying sound that made people tremble with fear. Boom! Just at this moment, Ji Chen's body moved slightly as a terrifying energy was released from his body. It was actually a series of flames that condensed into a gigantic shield of flames around him. Boom! In the next instant, the fiend god sword shadows directly bombarded the shield of flames. Boundless flames immediately exploded, forming waves of fire in the sky that quickly spread into a sea of flames. However, the shield of flames did not crack. Instead, the flames became even more violent and incessantly battered the void with incomparable intensity. Bang! The fiend god's sword shadows sank slightly, but they couldn't withstand the impact of the flames and directly exploded. Crack! However, at this moment, a crack appeared on the shield of flames. Although it wasn't big, it was very obvious. Ji Chen's body swayed once again as a trace of blood flowed out from the corner of his mouth. Although Nietion's sword did not break Ji Chen's shield of flames, it did injure him. Ji Chen suddenly raised his head and stared at Nietion with a pair of extremely cold eyes. However, Nietion smiled cold and provoked. There's still a third move. Do you still want to let me have it? Let me have it. Ji Chen growled and said, I, Ji Chen, always keep my word. Sure, Nietion said with a sinister smile. This was exactly the answer he wanted. One had to admit that Ji Chen's strength was indeed strong. He was indeed powerful to be able to easily block two of Nietion's swords while only defending. Ji Chen, stop fooling around. Hurry up and kill him. Tian Zhuowen yelled with bloodshot eyes. Ji Chen, don't play around anymore. However, Ji Chen completely ignored him and locked his cold eyes on Nietion. He said, The third move, make your move. Be careful. Nietion responded in a deep voice as the corner of his mouth curled up into an extremely cold smile. Then, the swords will around him crazily burst out and surged in the air. Like stormy waves, it was frightening. This kid's sword intent has become stronger again. Ji Chen looked cold at Nietion with an extremely gloomy expression. At this moment, he could not help but admit that he had underestimated Nietion. If he had known that Nietion was so terrifying, he would not have allowed him to make 3 moves first. But now it was too late for him to regret. Earth Sword, Moon Devouring Sword. At this moment, Nietion's voice was heard. The sword intent around his body reached its peak and instantly converged. A sword shadow that was almost 10,000 meters long whizzed out and poured down like a waterfall of light. What a terrifying aura! When Tian Zhuowen and the others saw this scene, their eyes trembled violently, and they cried out in horror. At this moment, Tian Zhuowen was very glad that he wasn't here to kill Nietion by himself. Otherwise, he would not be able to return alive. Flaming Cloud Tablet, come out. Ji Chen's expression was also extremely gloomy as he let out a low roar. Following this, a huge stone tablet appeared behind him, emitting blazing flames. Nietion stared at the flaming cloud tablet that had suddenly appeared. It was not the power of Ji Chen's bloodline, nor was it his primary spirit, but a sacred weapon. He did not expect Ji Chen to have a sacred weapon on him. Boom! As soon as the flaming cloud tablet appeared, the fiery shield around Ji Chen was instantly strengthened. Flames soared into the sky and danced wildly in the air like giant snakes. It was extremely terrifying. Bang! Rumble! In the next moment, the sword shadow landed directly on the fiery shield. An explosion took place in the void, and countless waves of fire were stirred up, forming a sea of fire in the sky. In an instant, the space within 10,000 meters turned into a furnace. Trees melted, rocks crumbled, the ground cracked, and the sky became misty. Boom! Crack, crack, crack! The giant sword shadow finally could not withstand the impact of the endless fiery clouds. It shattered inch by inch and turned into sword intent that dissipated in the air. Upon seeing this, Nie Tian's expression flickered, and he hastily retreated. He could only see the sea of fire on the ground, but he could no longer see Ji Chen. As for Tian Zhuowen and the others, they had already retreated tens of thousands of meters away. 3 moves have passed. It's my turn now. Right at this moment, a low and icy cold voice resounded, and it carried a resolute intent to slaughter as it surged through space. It was precisely Ji Chen. Damn it! Nie Tian frowned as he realized something was wrong. Chapter 27-29. Battle of Flames, Rumble. The flaming hands were violent and blazing. Wherever they passed, the space seemed to be on the verge of collapsing. Black smoke appeared in the air. Nie Tian was high up in the sky. Feeling the blazing aura coming from below, he couldn't help but narrow his eyes. I'll go all out. In an instant, he made a decision in his heart. A pair of astral soul wings appeared on his back. He slashed out with the starlight heavenly slash in his hand. Instantly, a sword shadow that was thousands of meters long swooped down. This sword strike contained the power of Nie Tian's primal chaos flame. He wanted to fight fire with fire. The primal chaos flame was a supreme flame that could suppress almost all fire-attributed energy. Even Ji Chen's flaming cloud tablet would be suppressed by the primal chaos flame. Boom! High up in the sky, the terrifying flaming hands shot towards the sky like a sea of flames, pressing down on Nie Tian. Nie Tian narrowed his eyes slightly when he felt the blazing aura. Rumble! In the next moment, the flaming sword shadow and the flaming hands collided. A thunderous sound echoed in the air, and a huge wave of fire that was hundreds of meters long was created. The entire sky was filled with terrifying flames. Boom, boom, boom. Waves of fire were like wild snakes, wreaking havoc in the air. It was extremely terrifying. Under the impact of the blazing waves of fire, Nie Tian's figure retreated continuously. His body was burned in many places, and he looked extremely miserable. At this moment, Ji Chen's figure soared into the sky. He stood tall in the sky, his eyes filled with ruthlessness as he stared at Nie Tian. However, at this moment, he didn't look too good. His face was extremely pale, and there were traces of blood at the corner of his mouth. Brat, you're indeed not simple. You actually forced me to use the flaming cloud tablet. Ji Chen looked at Nie Tian and said in a cold tone, Since I've used the flaming cloud tablet, you're dead for sure. Is that so? Nie Tianling laughed and a strange light flashed in his eyes. He could tell that Ji Chen's current strength wasn't enough to control the fire cloud tablet. At this moment, Ji Chen's face was pale and blood was flowing from the corner of his mouth. He wasn't injured by Nie Tian, but by the aura of the fire cloud steel. Using the fire cloud tablet was a huge burden to Ji Chen. You can still smile when you're about to die. When Ji Chen saw Nie Tian smile, he immediately felt humiliated. With a low roar, his figure instantly moved. Boom, boom, boom. In the next instant, on the fire cloud steel, scattered fireballs actually burst out, drawing out 3 fire lines in the air, rumbling over towards Nie Tian. Under the influence of the blazing aura, the space seemed to have become much weaker. It was on the verge of collapse, as if it would split open in the next moment. Such a scorching aura! Nie Tian frowned as he looked at the 3 fireballs. He felt that the surrounding space had become incomparably hot, as if he was in a furnace. One had to admit that the power of the fire cloud tablet was truly terrifying. At this moment, 3 fireballs arrived. They were like 3 giant flaming beasts that pounced over ferociously. 12 heaven-slaying sword formation, activate. Nie Tian didn't dare to be careless. With a low roar, 12 sword shadows appeared around him, soaring into the sky like violent dragons with a vast aura. Boom, boom, boom. Immediately, The moment the 12 heaven-slaying sword formation was activated, the 3 fireballs blasted down and landed on the sword formation. Pfft. In an instant, Nye Tian felt a huge impact. His body trembled and he spat out a mouthful of blood. But at the crucial moment, he stabilized his body and released the sword intent in his body to support the sword formation. The 12 sword shadows were like 12 giant guards surrounding him, and the 3 fireballs constantly released a terrifying flame force, attacking the sword formation. Nye Tian retreated while resisting the impact of the fireballs. With his current state, it was impossible for him to fight Ji Chen head-on. His only chance was to persevere. When Ji Chen was injured by the fire cloud tablet, it would be the moment he counterattacked. When Ji Chen saw that Nye Tian was still able to withstand the impact of the 3 fireballs, he could not help but narrow his eyes, and a cold murderous intent flashed in them. "Kid, let's see how long you can last." Then, with a low roar, the fire cloud tablet behind him suddenly moved and released another fireball. This time, the fireball's aura was even more terrifying, and it blasted towards Nye Tian. Boom! 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 The rolling fireball was like a tsunami, crashing violently. It was extremely terrifying. Seeing this, Nye Tian's eyes trembled, and his expression became extremely ugly. Resisting the 3 fireballs was already too much for him. Now that there were 3 more fireballs, how could he resist? "Ha ha ha, you stinking brat, you're dead." Tian Zhuowen saw this scene from below, as though he could already see the scene of Nye Tian being devoured by the flames. He immediately let out a hysterical laugh. The other 3 also let out cold murmurs, thinking that Nye Tian was dead for sure. High up in the sky, Nye Tian looked nervous, and beads of sweat appeared on his forehead. At this moment of life and death, he had to make a choice. Fight! At this moment, Nye Tian's eyes became determined, and he roared in his heart. Sword will and blood chi surged out of his body at the same time, and the demon god's power was also released crazily. At this moment, Nye Tian's long hair was flying in the wind, and his eyes were cold and murderous. He looked like a demon. Heaven-destroying sword, blood devours the firmament. In the next moment, he roared and pushed all the strength in his body to the limit. The starry sky slashed out, and a terrifying flaming sword shadow blasted out. At the same time, the 12 sword shadows also moved, and they instantly merged with the flaming sword shadow, making the power of the flaming sword shadow even more powerful. Boom! The 10,000-meter-long flaming sword shadow was like a terrifying wild beast, releasing an extremely terrifying aura. Boom! Crack, crack, crack! The flaming sword shadow whistled out, and everywhere it passed, the space actually cracked, and small space-time storms surged out. The 3 fireballs closest to Nye Tian exploded, and tongues of fire rolled out, as if they were going to burn everything. Tian Zhuowen's eyes trembled when he saw this scene, and he was so shocked that he couldn't speak. He had never thought that Nye Tian could explode with such terrifying power when he was on the verge of death. Boom! 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 In the next moment, the 3 larger fireballs bombarded the flaming sword shadow, and there was a loud explosion in the air, and the whole area was completely turned into a sea of fire. How is this possible? Ji Chen's eyes trembled, and he shouted in shock, and then his whole body was swallowed by the wave of fire. At the same time, Nye Tian's figure was also engulfed by the flames. The space tens of thousands of meters above the sky was filled with flames, and the scorching tongues of fire were like the tongues of snakes, as if they were going to burn everything into ashes. Tian Zhuowen and the others looked at the scene in the sky, and they were completely stunned. Their eyes were blank, and they even forgot to breathe. After a long time, the flames in the sky gradually dissipated, and 2 figures gradually appeared. They were Nye Tian and Ji Chen. At this moment, the 2 of them were in a very sorry state. Nye Tian's body was covered with blood, and his body was covered with wounds. His body was swaying, and it looked like he was going to fall at any time. Chapter 27:30. Killing with a single glance. The clash between Nye Tian and Ji Chen resulted in both sides suffering heavy injuries. However, Nye Tian's injuries were more severe than Ji Chen's. Fortunately, Nye Tian's martial body was strong. Otherwise, he would have been devoured by the fire cloud sword. Tian Zhuowen and the others stared at the two figures from below. They were all stunned and speechless for a long time. How did you? Ji Chen opened his mouth after a while, but he vomited a mouthful of blood. His shoulder was pierced, and he had lost the ability to fight. Even though Nye Tian's injuries were more severe, he still had 900 billion star power inside of him, and the Earthstring Source's incredible restorative power. Therefore, he still had some battle prowess left. If Nye Tian attacked now, he could easily kill Ji Chen. However, he didn't move, as if he had no intention of killing Ji Chen. This battle had exceeded Nye Tian's expectations. If Ji Chen hadn't given him the first 3 moves, the result might have been different. Apart from the bloody wound on his shoulder caused by Nye Tian, the rest of Ji Chen's injuries were caused by the Fire Cloud Steel. The Fire Cloud Steel was a sacred weapon, and Ji Chen was only a half-sage expert. It was impossible for him to control the Fire Cloud Steel. Nye Tian didn't underestimate Ji Chen. Apart from the fact that Ji Chen had given him the first 3 moves, he could tell that Ji Chen wasn't a cruel and bloodthirsty person. The person who really wanted to kill Nye Tian was Tian Zhuowen. At the end of the day, Ji Chen was just a knife. "Young Master Tian, that kid is injured," one of the cultivators beside Tian Zhuowen said with a chuckle. "Humph," Tian Zhuowen sneered. The corner of his mouth curled into a cold arc. Ji Chen failed to kill this kid. "That's good. I can kill him myself." Tian Zhuowen suddenly looked at the 3 people beside him and said, "The 3 of you, kill Ji Chen." The 3 of them were stunned. They thought they had heard wrong. "Didn't you hear? This young master wants you to kill Ji Chen." Tian Zhuowen smiled coldly, and the cold light in his eyes intensified. "Tian Zhuowen, you." Ji Chen frowned and spat out another mouthful of blood. His injuries were too severe. Even speaking was a huge burden to him. Young master, isn't Ji Chen one of us?" One of the cultivators had a doubtful expression as he said in a trembling voice. "Furthermore, Ji Chen is one of the Outer Yard's 10 tigers. If we kill him, there will be trouble. In Holy Soul Academy, it is strictly forbidden for disciples to kill each other. If there was a grudge between the 2 parties, they could go to the life and death arena." Tian Zhuowen had broken the school's rules by ambushing Nye Tian. Ji Chen was also from the outer court, and he was one of the outer court's 10 tigers. The so-called 10 tigers of the outer court referred to the 10 strongest people in the outer court. So, if Ji Chen was killed, it would definitely cause an uproar in the outer court. "If this young master wants you to kill him, then kill him. What's with all the nonsense?" Tian Zhuowen said coldly as he stared at the other 3 people. Yes. The 3 were stunned for a moment, but they nodded in agreement. They could tell that if they didn't kill Ji Chen, Tian Zhuowen would definitely kill them. Ji Chen's expression was extremely ugly. He didn't expect Tian Zhuowen to burn the bridge after crossing it. "Brat, obediently accept your death." At this moment, Tian Zhuowen's figure moved, and he directly rose into the sky. He stared coldly at Nye Tian as he approached him. "Do you really think you can kill me?" Nye Tian sneered and looked at Tian Zhuowen with disdain in his eyes. "You're about to die, yet you still dare to be so arrogant." Tian Zhuowen let out a cold laugh and said, "Your aura is extremely weak now. If I move my finger, you'll..." Pfft. However, before Tian Zhuowen could finish his sentence, a black ray of light whistled past him. It was extremely sharp and pierced through his neck. Tian Zhuowen's eyes trembled. Then, he felt a warm liquid gushing out from his neck, causing his face to turn pale. He covered his neck with both hands, but he couldn't stop the blood from flowing out. In the blink of an eye, his body was drenched in blood. His knees went weak, and he knelt in front of Nie Tian. His eyes stared at Nie Tian with shock and disbelief. He didn't know what just happened. Nie Tian was clearly an arrow at the end of its flight. How did he manage to launch such a deadly strike within a split second? What about me? Nie Tianling stared coldly at Tian Zhuowen. The corner of his lips curled up in an extremely sinister manner. Ji Chen, who was standing to the side, was completely dumbfounded. In that instant, he saw a black ray of light shoot out from Nie Tian's eyes, and then Tian Zhuowen died. Only now did he realize that Nie Tian's eyes were extremely terrifying. What Nie Tian was using was none other than the demon eye. He was indeed an arrow at the end of its flight, and the demonic eye was his last resort. The other three cultivators didn't even have time to approach Ji Chen before they were scared stiff. Their bodies stiffened, and they didn't dare to move. Tian Zhuowen's body slowly collapsed. Finally, he couldn't hold on any longer. He crashed into the ground, causing a layer of soil to form. Even at the moment of his death, he didn't know how he died. Young master. The three cultivators from the Tian clan reacted after a long time. They shouted in a daze, as if they were idiots. "You three small fries, why aren't you getting lost?" At this moment, Nie Tian's cold voice rang out. His voice wasn't loud, but it was like a thunderclap in the ears of the three cultivators. "Get lost." Once again, Nie Tian growled, his eyes cold and murderous. The three wooden sculptures finally reacted. As if they had been granted amnesty, their figures instantly moved, and they ran away in terror. Nie Tian looked at the three figures and knew that he could no longer sense their auras. Only then did he take a deep breath, and his heart relaxed. In the next moment, his body trembled, and he spat out a mouthful of blood. His face was so pale that it was devoid of color. After the battle with Ji Chen, his martial body had already reached its limit. Then, he used the demonic eye just now, which pushed his martial body to its limit. At this moment, Nie Tian didn't have any strength left. Even an Origin Meridian cultivator could easily kill him. Ji Chen looked at Nie Tian with a strange look in his eyes. However, Nie Tian didn't care about him. His figure moved, and he slowly landed on the ground. Ji Chen's figure landed at almost the same time as him, and his eyes were still fixed on him. "You're still not leaving?" Nie Tian let out a sigh of relief and looked at Ji Chen. "Why didn't you kill me just now?" Ji Chen's eyes narrowed, and he voiced the doubt in his heart. How could he not see that if Nie Tian had used the demonic eye on him just now, he would have been a corpse? "There's no irreconcilable enmity between us. You only want to kill me because Tian Zhuowen gave you some benefits." Nie Tian laughed bitterly. "Furthermore, I could only kill one person in my previous situation. Between you and Tian Zhuowen, of course I would choose to kill Tian Zhuowen." Ji Chen frowned, and he was momentarily speechless. At this moment, Nie Tian suddenly felt a majestic aura appear, and his eyes couldn't help but tremble. Boom! In the next moment, an elderly figure descended from the sky and arrived beside Nie Tian and Ji Chen. Chapter 2731. Ice and Fire Refinement. Outside the valley, the person who suddenly appeared in front of Nie Tian and Ji Chen was none other than Situ Bai, one of the Sacred Soul's 3 elders. Nie Tian. When Situ Bai saw that Nie Tian was severely injured, his eyes suddenly trembled. He quickly took a step forward and channeled a surge of energy into Nie Tian. After receiving the surge of energy from Situ Bai, Nie Tian's complexion turned slightly better and wasn't as pale as before. When Situ Bai felt that Nie Tian's aura had stabilized, he turned to Ji Chen and seemed to notice something. He frowned and asked, "You are from the Ji clan?" Ji Chen didn't know Situ Bai, but he could feel that the latter's strength was unfathomable and guessed that the latter's identity must be terrifyingly high. However, his expression wasn't pleasant. Instead, it was very cold. Situ Bai responded coldly. Situ Bai's face sank slightly. He only recovered after a long time, but he didn't say anything. Nie Tian saw this scene and felt a little strange. Situ Bai's attitude towards Ji Qin was very strange. It seemed to be a kind of guilty gaze. Ji Qin was also very cold and even a little disgusted with Situ Bai. With Ji Qin's intelligence, he could definitely guess that Situ Bai's identity wasn't simple. However, it was really strange for him to show such an attitude. Nie Tian, what happened? Situ Bai no longer looked at Ji Qin and asked Nie Tian with a frown. Nie Tian explained what had happened to Tian Zhuowen. Then, with a bitter smile, he said, "Actually, Tian Zhuowen and I didn't have anything to do with each other. However, he wouldn't let me go, and insisted on killing me. I had no choice." Tian Zhuowen, from the Tian clan. When Situ Bai heard Nie Tian's words, he couldn't help but sigh. His aged face revealed an unconcealable worry as he shook his head and said, "This matter is a little troublesome." Nie Tian furrowed his brows, a bitter look on his face. He knew that Tian Zhuowen's grandfather was the Saint Soul's vice dean. Thus, Tian Zhuowen's death would definitely infuriate the vice dean. What was more troublesome was that the three martial artists had run away. Of course, Nie Tian wanted to kill the three of them, but he was already at his limit. He didn't have the strength to kill them. If those three had been a little calmer and hadn't been scared away by Nie Tian and Ji Qin might have been corpses by now. Nie Tian had killed Tian Zhuowen. This matter could not be concealed. If Tian Zhuowen's grandfather wanted to take revenge, it would be troublesome. Let's not care about that for now. If this matter gets out of hand, let this old man handle it. Situ Bai pondered for a moment and said solemnly, "Thank you, Senior." Nie Tian bowed slightly and expressed his gratitude. Nie Tian, were you the one who injured him? Situ Bai suddenly pointed at Ji Qin and asked. Half of it was me, and the other half was his own injury. Nie Tian smiled and said faintly. Although Ji Qin was injured in the battle with Nie Tian, the one who injured him the most wasn't Nie Tian, but the fire cloud tablet. You are indeed stronger than me. There's no need to be humble. Ji Qin frowned and said solemnly. Nie Tian's lips twitched, but he didn't deny it. You used the fire cloud tablet? Situ Bai looked at Ji Qin and asked. This is my business. It has nothing to do with you. Ji Qin's response was still cold. He turned around and was about to leave. If you leave now, the injuries on your body will take at least a few months to recover. Furthermore, there is a possibility that your martial body will be permanently damaged. This will be a huge obstacle for your future cultivation. Situ Bai frowned and said lightly. So what? Ji Qin's body froze. He replied coldly without turning his head. I can help you recover from your injuries, Situ Bai said in a deep voice. I don't need your pity. Ji Qin growled as if he was very angry. After saying that, he took another step and was about to leave. If your martial body is damaged, you will never be able to take revenge for the Ji clan. You better think it through. Situ Bai looked at Ji Qin and said again. Ji Qin stopped again. He hesitated for a long time and finally turned around. Nie Tian frowned even more when he saw this. It seemed that Ji Qin bore a deep grudge, and this grudge might even be related to Situ Bai. Let's go. Situ Bai didn't say anything else and spoke nonchalantly before leading the way in front. After a while, Situ Bai led Nie Tian and Ji Qin to the Bai Peak. Then, the three of them came to a secluded valley. Before entering the secluded valley, Nie Tian sensed a strange aura that made him feel a little puzzled. This aura was very strange. It seemed to be blazing and cold at the same time. Ji Qin's expression was also strange. It was obvious that he had also sensed something unusual. Situ Bai smiled faintly and did not say anything. He directly led Nie Tian and Ji Qin into the secluded valley. In the center of the secluded valley was a deep pool. White steam was rising from the surface of the water. It was the cold air that was condensed under extremely cold conditions. What was strange was that if one looked carefully at the deep pool, they would find that there was a stream of blazing magma surging under the water. This deep pool was actually filled with magma and cold air on the surface. Senior Situ, what is this place? Nyetian frowned and felt very strange. This secluded valley is called Ice Fire Valley, and this deep pool is called Ice Fire Lake. Situbai laughed and said, "You should have noticed that the Ice Fire Lake is very strange. There is magma underwater and cold air on the surface." "Why is that?" Nie Tian nodded and asked with a frown. Ji Chen also looked at Situbai and felt very strange. A long time ago, the Ice Fire Valley was the crater of a huge volcano. Situbai smiled faintly and said, "Later, someone moved the entire Ice Fire Valley to an icy land and then used a secret method to absorb the cold air of the icy land and gather it in the valley without dispersing. Later, after a long period of landform evolution, it became the Ice Fire Valley today. The Ice Fire Valley is very strange. There is blazing magma underwater and cold air on the surface. Moreover, the concentration of divine power in the valley far exceeds that of the outside world. In this kind of environment, martial artists can cultivate and temper their bodies with ice and fire. It can constantly stimulate the martial body and improve the strength of the martial body. In this way, it can stimulate the martial artist's potential and improve their martial arts talent." When Ye Tian heard Situbai's words, he could not help but focus his gaze, and his eyes were blazing. This Ice Fire Lake was too magical. It could actually improve a martial artist's martial arts talent. Martial arts talent was originally determined innately, and it was difficult to change it later on. It was precisely because of this that the Ice Fire Lake was even more precious. At this moment, Ji Chen's expression was equally excited, as if he could not wait to enter the Ice Fire Lake to cultivate. At this moment, Nie Tian understood that the gift Situ Bai wanted to give him was to cultivate in the Ice Fire Lake. One had to admit that this was indeed a very good gift. "Alright, the two of you can go down now." Situ Bai smiled faintly and looked at Nie Tian and Ji Chen with eyes full of anticipation. Nie Tian nodded and did not stand on ceremony. He took a step forward and jumped into the Ice Fire Lake. Ji Chen's figure landed almost at the same time. Whoosh! The moment he entered the Ice Fire Lake, Nie Tian first felt a bone-chilling coldness followed by a blazing heat. Under the impact of this extreme power, all the meridians and blood in his body became active. All the pores in his body opened up and constantly absorbed the power in the lake. However, at this moment, Nie Tian suddenly felt a strange power appear in his body, causing his expression to change suddenly. Chapter 2732. A little more Nie Tian abruptly sensed that the Saint's soul incantation within his body had become active, causing his expression to involuntarily change. If the Saint's soul incantation flared up at this moment, it would be terrible. Previously, when he was fusing with the Saint's soul incantation, he had already felt the terror of the incantation. If the incantation flared up at this moment, he would be unable to resist at all. Good chance. But at this moment, Fat Cat's voice rang out, appearing very excited. The Saint's soul incantation flared up, and this was the best opportunity for him to study the incantation. "Nie brat, you have to hold on." At practically the same time, the Ghost Emperor's voice also rang out, similarly very excited. Nie Tian frowned and had a speechless expression. These two fellows, Fat Cat and the Ghost Emperor, had probably been waiting for this opportunity for a long time. Boom! And at the next moment, Nie Tian suddenly felt that the Saint's soul incantation within his body had become berserk. Thousands of incantation runes formed a terrifying impact, surging in his limbs and veins, as though wanting to tear his body apart in an instant. Intense pain assaulted his entire body, causing Nie Tian's expression to become distorted, and his entire person appeared sinister and terrifying. And when Situ Bai saw Nye Tian's expression, he couldn't help but frown, feeling strange in his heart. The environment of the ice-fire lake was strange. Martial artists who entered would have to endure the power of cold ice and the power of raging fire at the same time. The martial body would have to endure the impact of two extreme powers, and it was extremely terrifying. However, the power of the ice-fire lake wouldn't be displayed so quickly. Nye Tian had just entered the lake, so why was he already in so much pain? Situ Bai knew that Nye Tian was a person with heaven-defying talent, and by right, he shouldn't be in such a state. Ji Chen, who was beside Nye Tian, had an ugly expression, but it definitely wasn't as exaggerated as Nye Tian's. Ji Chen glanced at Nye Tian, and his brows slightly furrowed, with the same puzzlement on his face. Although he didn't want to admit it, he knew in his heart that Nye Tian's talent was higher than his. Even he could easily endure the tempering of the ice-fire lake, so why was Nye Tian in so much pain? In the next moment, Situ Ba sensed Nye Tian's martial body and was shocked to discover that there was a terrifying force in Nye Tian's body. It was like a wild beast, violent and ferocious. Nye Tian. Situ Bai didn't know what that energy was, so he couldn't help but frown and shout. "Senior Situ, I'm fine." Nye Tian spoke with a heavy tone. Even though he was enduring immense pain, he still gritted his teeth and persisted. Situ Bai's eyes narrowed. After confirming that Nye Tian's aura was stable and there were no signs of disorder, he finally relaxed. At this time, Ji Chen had already started cultivating. The water around him was slowly fluctuating, and one could clearly see waves of energy constantly seeping into his body, slowly nourishing it. However, Nye Tian was still fighting against the Holy Soul incantation. Not only did the martial body have to withstand the impact of the ice and fire, it also had to withstand the violent tearing power of the Holy Soul incantation. Situ Bai looked at the two people in the lake and said in his heart, "I wonder how long these two brats can last in the lake. When I first entered the ice-fire lake, I lasted for 6 hours. These two brats' talent is above mine, so they should be able to last longer than me." As he spoke in his heart, his eyes couldn't help but lock onto Nye Tian's body. He said in his heart, "Nye Tian is someone that Kuyo Oniguchi is interested in. His talent is unimaginable. This old man is looking forward to how long he can last." The impact of the ice and fire in the ice-fire lake was a slow accumulation process. The longer a martial artist stayed in the ice-fire lake, the more energy they would absorb, and at the same time, the greater the impact of the ice and fire would be. The extreme power of ice and fire would impact a martial artist's body. Not only could it increase the strength of the martial body, but it could also improve a martial artist's talent and potential. It was extremely mysterious. The ice-fire lake was Situ Bai's private cultivation ground. Besides him, no one else was allowed to enter. Nye Tian was in the ice-fire lake. Although he was enduring immense pain, he could clearly feel that the power of his martial body was slowly increasing. The Saint's Soul curse mark was very active and even violent. However, it didn't cause any harm to his martial body. Instead, it had a strong improvement effect on his martial body. Dean Xinghun was right. Before the Saint's Soul curse mark flared up, the power of the curse mark would only be beneficial to Nye Tian's martial body. Fat Cat and Ghost Emperor took advantage of the active state of the Saint's Soul curse mark to carefully sense the curse mark. They were preparing for Nye Tian to completely control the curse mark in the future. Soon, 10 hours had passed. Ji Chen finally couldn't take it anymore. He leaped out of the ice-fire lake. He landed beside Situ Bai. His injuries had all healed, and his aura had clearly increased. "Very good. Your strength should have increased by 1 level." Situ Bai looked at Ji Chen and said with a faint smile. Ji Chen nodded slightly. Although his expression didn't change much, he was very happy. His current strength had increased from first stage demi-saint to second stage demi-saint. There were 3 transitional realms between the divine realm and the saint realm. They were demi-saint, and false saint. Each transitional realm was further divided into 9 levels, from first stage to 9th stage. However, advancing from first stage to 9th stage was relatively easy. The most difficult was the breakthrough from peak divine realm to half saint. It was the biggest test for a martial artist. Take Ji Chun for example. He had spent nearly 100 years to advance from peak divine realm to first stage demi-saint. However, it only took him a dozen days to advance from first stage demi-saint to second stage demi-saint. Of course, the reason why he could advance so quickly was that he had just undergone the ice and fire body tempering. However, even without the ice and fire body tempering, it would only take him half a year or even a few months to advance from first stage demi-saint to second stage demi-saint. There were many false saint experts in the saint soul domain. However, the number of false saints who had reached the peak could be counted on one hand. For example, Liang Zhen and Yu Lian, whom Nie Tian had met earlier, were also false saint experts. However, they were only third-stage demi-saints, which was a far cry from the peak 9th stage demi-saint Situ Bai. Ji Chen didn't say anything else. He just looked at Nie Tian with a burning gaze, as if he was waiting for something. Situ Bai was also looking at Nie Tian with a burning gaze. He wanted to see Nie Tian's strength improve again. Nie Tian was currently a peak paramount god, and if he could reach the peak of the half-step paramount god level, his battle prowess would definitely improve by leaps and bounds. After that, Nie Tian stayed in the lake of ice and fire for another 10 hours or so. He finally couldn't take it anymore and leaped out of the lake. By the time he landed, all of his injuries had been healed, and his aura was much stronger than before. Unfortunately, he still hadn't broken through to the peak of the half-step paramount level. It was as if he was missing an opportunity to break through to the next level. Still lacking a little. Situ Bai looked at Nie Tian and said in a deep voice, "But it doesn't matter. You can often come to the ice-fire lake to cultivate in the future. I believe it won't be long before you break through to the peak of half-step." "Thank you, Senior Situ." Nie Tian bowed and thanked him. He was very grateful. Although he was unable to achieve a breakthrough, he could feel that his martial body was much stronger than before, and his aura was even more surging. The effects of the ice and fire body tempering were very obvious, and if it wasn't for the Holy Soul Curse, Nie Tian was confident that he could temper himself in the ice and fire lake for several days. However, he couldn't help but feel regretful that he couldn't break through. Nie Tian. At this time, Ji Chen suddenly looked at Nie Tian and stretched out his palm. Half of the golden liquid was floating in his palm. He handed it over and said, "For you." "What's this?" Nie Tian looked at the golden liquid and couldn't help but frown. Chapter 2733. Divine Qi Liquid, Divine Qi Liquid? Nie Tian's eyes darkened when he heard Situ Bai's voice. He was shocked and confused. He was shocked that Situ Bai had such a strong reaction, and he was confused about what the divine Qi liquid was. He could feel that the saint energy aura of the golden droplet was so strong that the entire valley was filled with a strong saint energy aura under the influence of the golden droplet. "This is indeed the divine Qi liquid, but it's only half a drop," Ji Chen said calmly. Nie Tian frowned, and the confusion in his eyes deepened. He looked at Situ Bai and asked, "Senior Situ, what is the divine Qi liquid?" Situ Bai regained his composure, but his eyes were still blazing as he looked at the half-drop of divine Qi liquid. He stroked his beard and said, "Nie Tian, do you know why the sacred spirit domain is filled with divine energy aura?" "I do," Nie Tian nodded and said, "because the sacred spirit domain nurtured the sacred world seed." Nie Tian had heard about the sacred spirit domain from Huairu before he came. The sacred spirit domain was a world that was transforming from a domain to a sacred world because the sacred world seed was nurtured there. The so-called sacred world seed was essentially a divine energy whirlpool. Yes. Situ Bai nodded and fixed his eyes on the golden liquid. He said, "This half a drop of divine chi liquid was extracted from the space where the sacred world seed is." The divine chi liquid was extracted from the sacred world seed? Nie Tian was stunned. He knew that the sacred spirit domain was transforming into a sacred world because of the existence of the sacred world seed. If this half a drop of divine chi liquid came from the sacred world seed, didn't that mean that the golden liquid contained an enormous amount of divine energy? No. Situ Bai shook his head and smiled. Situ Batsi shook his head and said with a smile, "The Saint Chi liquid is not taken directly from the sacred world seed. Instead, it is taken from the space where the sacred world seed is located. After being refined by a divine alchemist, it becomes the Saint Chi liquid." Nie Tian took a deep breath and nodded. Even so, the holy power contained in the holy Chi liquid was still very rich. The space around the sacred world seed was definitely filled with a large amount of holy power. Since the holy Chi liquid came from such a space, it was naturally extremely precious. Thinking of this, Nie Tian's eyes narrowed. He looked at Ji Chun and asked, "Ji Chun, why are you giving me this half a drop of Saint Chi liquid?" "This is what you deserve," Ji Chun said with a solemn expression. "Why?" Nie Tian was taken aback, confusion filling his face. The sacred Chi liquid was Ji Chen's. How had it become Nie Tian's? Nie Tian could not understand this. "This half a drop of Saint Chi liquid is Tian Zhuowen's reward for killing you." Ji Chen's eyes darkened as he said, "I failed to kill you, and you killed Tian Zhuowen, so this half drop of Saint Chi liquid should be yours." Nie Tian's face darkened. Ji Chen's logic made him speechless. However, Tian Zhuowen was quite generous. In order to kill Nie Tian, he had actually taken out half a drop of Saint Chi liquid. In the Holy Soul Academy, it was strictly forbidden for disciples to fight among themselves. Ji Chun had actually taken a huge risk by killing Nie Tian. If this matter was leaked, he would not be able to keep his life. Therefore, the reward of half a drop of Saint Chi liquid was not considered high. "You can keep it." Ji Chun took a step forward and directly handed the Saint Chi liquid to Nie Tian. He then nodded slightly at Situ Bai and turned to leave. Nie Tian held the half-drop of Saint Chi liquid in his hand. It took him a long time to react. He had to admit that Ji Chun was really a strange person. Sigh. Situ Bai looked at Ji Chen's back and his old face became even more solemn. Finally, he let out a long sigh. "Senior Situ, between you and Ji Chen, it seems like..." Nie Tian could not help but ask as he looked at Situ Bai. However, before he could finish his sentence, Situ Bai waved his hand and interrupted him. He smiled bitterly and said, "It's all in the past. Let's not talk about it." Nie Tian frowned, but didn't ask any further. It was obvious that Ji Chun and the Ji family had an indescribable relationship with Situ Bai. Ji Chen's indifference towards Situ Bai was not without reason. It could even be said that he hated Situ Bai. "Nie Tian, hurry up and take this half a drop of holy chi liquid." At this moment, Situ Bai smiled faintly and said excitedly, "The Saint Chi liquid is good stuff. If I were to use points to exchange for it, I'm afraid it would cost me 100 points. So many points." Nie Tian was stunned for a moment, and his face was full of surprise. He remembered that Si Xiaoye had only used 100 points to exchange for the 9 Extremities War God technique. The 9 Extremities War God technique was a high-grade divine rank martial technique, but it was only worth half a drop of Saint Chi liquid. From this, it could be seen how precious the Saint Chi liquid was. The fact that Ji Chun was willing to give such a good thing to Nie Tian showed that he was a straightforward person. "Hurry up." Situ Bai's eyes shone brightly as he said, "If you consume this half-drop of Saint Chi liquid, you might be able to make a breakthrough." "All right." Nie Tian nodded heavily. Without any hesitation, He raised his head and swallowed the half-drop of Saint Chi liquid. As the golden liquid entered his stomach, he instantly felt a huge warm current flow through his body. The energy was vast and surging, but it was like a gentle spring rain. It was subtle and silent, and his martial body did not feel any impact or burden. This was the benefit of the Saint Chi liquid. It contained powerful energy, and at the same time, it would not affect the martial body of a cultivator. Moreover, any cultivator could easily absorb the energy of the Saint Chi liquid. After a while, Nie Tian felt the warmth in his body gradually disappear. He had completely absorbed the Saint Chi liquid. You absorbed it so quickly! Situbai looked at Nie Tian in astonishment. Although he knew that the Saint Chi liquid could be absorbed quickly by a cultivator, he was the only one who could absorb it as quickly as Nie Tian did. Generally speaking, it would take a few hours or even a few days for a cultivator to absorb half a drop of Saint Chi liquid. However, Nie Tian had completely absorbed it in the blink of an eye. The strength of his martial body was unimaginable. Nie Tian, how do you feel? Situ Bai's eyes trembled slightly as he asked, unable to conceal his excitement. Nie Tian frowned slightly as he sensed his martial body. It was much stronger than before, but he still had not made a breakthrough. Still no breakthrough? Situ Bai looked at Nie Tian and could not help but frown. Nie Tian's martial body had too high a requirement for strength. He had absorbed half a drop of Saint Chi liquid, but he still had not made a breakthrough. However, this also showed that Nie Tian's martial arts foundation was far more solid than the average person's. If only I had another half a drop of Saint Chi liquid. After a while, the corners of Nie Tian's mouth twitched, and he said with a smile. Situ Bai was speechless. His expression seemed to say, "Do you think the Saint Chi liquid is cabbage?" Nie Tian had absorbed half a drop of Saint Chi liquid and realized the benefits of this thing. Of course, he wanted more. Other powers, such as divine elixirs, divine formations, and even martial arts inheritances, would take a long time to completely absorb its power. Therefore, Nie Tian rarely took divine elixirs because he did not have the time to digest the power within them. The Saint Chi liquid was different. It could be absorbed instantly, which was exactly what Nie Tian needed. If he could have 8 or 10 drops of Saint Chi liquid, Nie Tian believed that his strength would definitely improve rapidly. Unfortunately, the Saint Chi liquid needed points to be exchanged, and Nie Tian did not have a single point. Chapter 2734. In the Sacred Spirit Valley, you still want the Sacred Chi liquid? Situ Bai looked at Nie Tian with a slight frown. Of course, he knew what the latter was thinking. The Sacred Chi liquid was indeed a good thing. Anyone who had tried it would want to try it again. Yes. Nie Tian nodded heavily. There was nothing to hide. The Academy's points are very difficult to earn. Usually, it requires disciples to accept missions from the Academy. Moreover, ordinary missions are only worth 1 or 2 points. Even a heaven-class mission is only worth 10 points. Situ Bai pondered and said, "You just came to the Academy, so you definitely don't have any points in your token. It's almost impossible to earn 100 points in a short time." When Nie Tian heard Situ Bai's words, he couldn't help but frown with an ugly expression. Actually, Nie Tian could directly look for Dean Saint Soul at this time and tell him that he needed the Sacred Chi liquid. Dean Saint Soul also hoped that Nie Tian could quickly improve his strength, so he probably wouldn't refuse. However, Nie Tian wouldn't do that. He wanted to rely on his own strength to earn 100 points. Nie Tian, you just came to the Academy and aren't familiar with the Academy's missions, right? Situ Bai looked at Nie Tian and suddenly asked. Nie Tian shook his head with a blank expression. Situ Bai laughed and said, "If the Academy's disciples want to earn points, they have to complete the Academy's missions. The Academy's missions are divided into 4 ranks according to their difficulty, namely Heaven, Earth, Mystic, and Fantasy. Each rank is further divided into 3 levels, low, medium, and high. Nie Tian nodded. The classification of the missions was similar to the classification of martial arts technique. Different mission levels will result in different points. Situ Bai smiled faintly and said, generally speaking, a yellow class mission can only give 1 or 2 points, a mystic class mission can give 4 or 5 points, an earth class mission can give 7 or 8 points, and a heaven class mission can give 10 points. Nie Tian nodded slightly and said, the heaven class mission is quite a lot of points. Situ Batsi glanced at him and said, heaven tier missions are the most difficult missions. Let alone ordinary disciples, even core disciples wouldn't dare to casually accept a heaven tier mission. Only those who are on the hidden dragon list would dare to accept a heaven rank mission. Hidden dragon list? Nie Tian was confused, but he did not ask anything. He guessed that this should be a ranking list of the Academy's disciples. Those who could enter the ranking list were definitely stronger than the core disciples. Situ Bai didn't explain about the hidden dragon leaderboard. Instead, he smiled bitterly and said, with your current strength, you can only take on yellow tier missions at most. This. Nie Tian was rendered speechless, unable to utter a word. After completing a yellow rank mission, he would only be rewarded with 1 or 2 points. At this rate, it would take him years to earn 100 points. Only now did he realize how difficult it was to accumulate 100 points. Si Xiaoye was willing to use 100 points to help him obtain the 9 Extremities War God Art. She had indeed paid a huge price. However, Si Xiaoye said that she didn't help Nie Tian for free. Nie Tian owed her a big favor. You haven't been to the Holy Soul Valley yet, right? At this moment, Situ Batsi suddenly looked at Nie Tian and asked with a strange look in his eyes. Holy Soul Valley? What is that place? Nie Tian was stunned for a moment and frowned. As expected, you haven't been there. That's good. Situ Batsi smiled faintly and said, the Holy Soul Valley is a secret territory of the Holy Soul Academy. Every disciple has a chance to enter it. Only one chance to enter? Nie Tian's gaze froze and he couldn't help but feel strange. What kind of place was the Holy Soul Valley that only allowed warriors to enter once? I won't tell you too much about the Holy Soul Valley. When you get there, you will naturally know. Situ Batsi smiled faintly and didn't want to say too much. With a trace of craftiness in his eyes, he said, if everything goes smoothly, you should be able to obtain some points in the Holy Soul Valley. Okay. Nie Tian nodded and said, if that's the case, Senior Situ, I won't disturb you anymore. I'll go to the Holy Soul Valley now. Okay, go ahead. Situ Batsi nodded. Nie Tian didn't stay any longer. His figure moved and directly left the Ice-Fire Valley. Seeing Nie Tian's figure disappear, Situ Batsi's face became a little ugly. He smiled bitterly and said, this kid killed the people of the Tian family. This old man has to go out and visit that old guy Tian Yu. The fact that Nie Tian had killed Tian Zhuowen was a big deal. Situ Batsi was going to personally find Deputy Dean Tian Yu and have a good talk with him. Otherwise, if Tian Yu kept looking for trouble with Nie Tian, it would be terrible. After Nie Tian left the Ice-Fire Valley, he quickly returned to the outer court. He inquired about the Holy Soul Valley and learned that the Dao Valley would open in 3 days. Therefore, he directly returned to his small courtyard and entered his room to cultivate. In the blink of an eye, 3 days had passed. Nie Tian walked out of his room again. His whole body's aura was as sharp as a sword. His whole body showed off its sharpness, and his momentum was a lot more vigorous. Nie Tian. As soon as he walked out of the small courtyard, he saw Feng Qi behind Feng Qi. There was a beautiful figure, Si Xiaoye. When Nie Tian saw these two people, his eyes couldn't help but narrow. He smiled bitterly in his heart and said, I didn't expect these two guys to be together so soon. Si Xiaoye saw Nie Tian's abnormal expression. She took a step forward and said snappily, don't think too much. I came to find you and met this guy on the way. This is fate. It's arranged by heaven. You can't escape it. Feng Qi smiled and looked at Si Xiaoye with a peach blossom face. You shut up. Si Xiaoye glared at Feng Qi cold and reprimanded him. My dear wife told me to shut up, so of course I'll shut up. Feng Qi smiled wretchedly. His face was filled with happiness. Si Xiaoye frowned and couldn't be bothered with Feng Qi, yet Tian curled his lips at the side. These two were simply a team to show off their love. Feng Qi, why are you looking for me? Then, Nye Tian asked with a faint smile. Today is the Holy Soul Valley opening. Let's go together. Feng Qi and Si Xiaoye's voices sounded at the same time. Nye Tian was stunned and speechless. The two of them were quite in sync. What else can I say? People in love have telepathy. Feng Qi was also stunned for a moment. Then, he looked at Si Xiaoye and smiled. Shameless. Who's in love with you? Si Xiaoye scolded. Then, she looked at Nye Tian and said, Are you going to the Holy Soul Valley? I'm going. Nye Tian smiled. He was going to the Holy Soul Valley. But he was very surprised. Si Xiaoye should have been in the Holy Soul Academy for a long time, but she had never been to the Holy Soul Valley. Then let's go. Si Xiaoye didn't say anything else. Then, she turned around and left. The corner of Nye Tian's mouth twitched. He couldn't help but look at Feng Qi. Nye Tian wouldn't like a girl with a character like Si Xiaoye. Then, Nye Tian and Feng Qi were led by Si Xiaoye to a canyon in the Holy Soul mountain range. At this time, there was a sea of people outside the canyon. There were more than 100,000 people. Chapter 2735. Chapter 2735. Chapter 2, 735. 10 tigers of outer school. More than 100,000 martial artists had gathered outside the canyon. Most of them were below the half-step saint realm. Moreover, most of them were freshmen who had just joined the academy. Of course, there were also a few experts whose strength had reached the semi-sage level. They had stayed in the outer courtyard for a long time. Take Si Xiaoye for example. Although Nye Tian couldn't tell how strong she was definitely at the half-saint realm. Still, the strongest martial artist here was merely a demi-saint. There were no demi-saints or pseudo-saints. The Sacred Soul Valley was a mystic realm that was protected by powerful restrictions. Once a martial artist entered, their strength would be greatly suppressed. Moreover, the stronger one was, the stronger the suppression would be. If a champion above demi-saint were to enter the Holy Spirit Valley, they would be crushed to death by the restrictive power within. The Holy Soul Academy had known for a long time that the most suitable warriors to enter the Holy Soul Valley were God Realm Peak and Half-Saint. Martial artists who were too weak would not be able to do anything after entering the valley, even though they did not fear the restrictions. If one's strength was too strong, they would not be able to withstand the power of the restriction. So many people want to enter the Holy Soul Valley. Nye Tian couldn't help but frown as he looked at the sea of people in front of him. Newcomers want to join in the fun, so of course there are a lot of people. Si Xiaoye smiled faintly and glanced at Nye Tian. Nye Tian and I are also newcomers, but we are not here to join in the fun. Feng Qi smiled faintly as he looked at Nye Tian. Nye Tian nodded. He entered the Sacred Soul Valley for his own purpose. Miss Xiao Yu. At this moment, a clear and sharp voice rang out. A white-robed man with a folding fan in his hand appeared. His facial features were handsome, and he looked straight at Si Xiaoye as he walked over. Chen Shuaibin. Si Xiaoye looked at the man in white with disgust. Miss Xiao Yu, I didn't expect you to also want to enter the Holy Soul Valley. It just so happens that I also want to enter. Why don't we go together? The white-robed man named Chen Shuaibin gently fanned himself with a faint smile on his face. His eyes were filled with undisguised lust, and his gaze never left Si Xiaoye. Nye Tian couldn't help but frown when he saw Chen Shuaibin's blatant act. Even an idiot could tell that Chen Shuaibin harbored ill intentions towards Si Xiaoye. Sorry, I already have a companion, Si Xiaoya replied coldly, not even looking at Chen Shuaibin. Chen Shuaibin's eyes narrowed as his gaze swept across Nie Tian and Feng Qi. He sneered and said, "Your companions are these two pieces of trash?" Nie Tian and Feng Qi's faces darkened at Chen Shuaibin's words. However, Nie Tian remained cold and only stared at Chen Shuaibin without saying a word. Feng Qi, on the other hand, couldn't help but look at Chen Shuaibin with disdain. He said coldly, "Which family's mad dog is this, running out to bite people?" "Kid, what did you say?" Chen Shuaibin's face darkened as he was called a mad dog. His eyes flashed with a murderous intent. "I said you're a mad dog. Can't you understand human language?" Feng Qi wasn't the slightest bit afraid. He raised his eyebrows and acted very arrogantly. "You're courting death." Chen Shuaibin's eyes were extremely cold, but he didn't make a move. There were too many people here, even he didn't dare to openly make a move. "There's someone courting death, but it's not me, it's you." Feng Qi sneered and responded with a provocative look. Chen Shuaibin's face darkened almost to the point of bleeding, but he could only suppress the anger in his heart. He said cold, "Stinking brat, wait until we enter the Holy Soul Valley. You're dead." "Good, I'll wait for you." Feng Qi smiled cold, still arrogant. "Humph. We'll see." Chen Shuaibin clenched his fists and closed the fan in his hand. He swung his hand and left. Feng Qi faintly smiled and didn't put him in his eyes in the slightest. Si Xiaoya looked at Chen Shuaibin's back and frowned. Her pretty face couldn't hide her worry. She said, "Chen Shuaibin is ranked in the top 3 of the 10 tigers of the outer sect. Provoking him really isn't a good thing. Don't worry, my wife. No matter how big it is, your husband will take care of it." Feng Qi laughed and said very shamelessly, "Take care of your sister." Si Xiaoya fiercely glared at Feng Qi and couldn't help but curse. "My sister isn't in the Holy Soul Academy. How can I take care of it?" Feng Qi laughed and put on an innocent look. Nie Tian also frowned at this moment and his eyes were filled with worry. The 10 tigers of the outer sect were the 10 strongest people in the outer courtyard. Ji Chen, who he met before, was one of the 10 tigers. However, Ji Chen was only ranked 9th among the 10 tigers, while Chen Shuaibin was ranked in the top 3. His strength was far stronger than Ji Chen's. Moreover, Nie Tian just sensed that Chen Shuaibin's aura was indeed much stronger than Ji Chen's. They hadn't even entered the Holy Soul Valley, and they had already provoked such an expert. It really wasn't a good start. Feng Qi didn't care in the slightest. He had a calm expression on his face. "Everyone be quiet." At this moment, a majestic voice resounded. Then, 5 or 6 figures walked out of the canyon. Each of them had a powerful aura. One look and you could tell that they were experts. These few warriors were the teachers who presided over the opening of the Holy Soul Valley. And the leading teacher was a female warrior. Moreover, Nie Tian wasn't unfamiliar with her. It was Bai Ruozhu who wanted to take Jun Aoqing as her disciple that day. Now Nie Tian already knew that the disciple taking that day was simply a conspiracy. It was the dean of the Holy Soul Academy who wanted to control Jun Aoqing. But Bai Ruozhu didn't know that she was just being used. Nie Tian looked at Bai Ruozhu with a calm expression, without any ripples. But when Bai Ruozhu saw his figure, she awkwardly smiled, as if she was somewhat guilty. At this moment, everyone quieted down and waited for Bai Ruozhu and the others to speak. Bai Ruozhu stepped forward, her gaze sweeping across the crowd. She faintly smiled and said, "Disciples, most of you have just entered the academy and know very little about the Holy Soul Valley. Let me briefly introduce you. The Holy Soul Valley is a secret realm of the academy, and every disciple of the academy has a chance to enter it. However, I must warn you that the Holy Soul Valley is shrouded in a powerful barrier, which is why any martial artist above the demi-saint level would be suppressed to death once they enter. If there are any demi-saint elites here, please leave immediately. Don't joke around with your lives." The crowd was a little restless after she spoke, but soon calmed down. Bai Ruoju's beautiful eyes flickered. She knew that every time the Holy Soul Valley was opened, there would always be those who refused to believe in the heresy and tried to enter the valley, only to die tragically within. And this time would probably not be an exception. Still, she did not hesitate and continued, "The Holy Soul Valley is a secret realm of ancient times, and there are two things that are most commonly found there. One is the Holy Soul Bloodwolf, and the other is the Holy Soul Grass. Once you enter the valley, you can hunt the Holy Soul Bloodwolf and harvest the Holy Soul Grass." According to the Academy's rules, harvesting one stalk of Holy Soul Grass would earn you 1 point, and the blood core of a Holy Soul Bloodwolf would earn you 2 points. Upon hearing Bai Ruoju's words, Nie Tian's eyes could not help but tremble as his gaze became heated. It seemed that the Holy Soul Valley was indeed a good place to earn points. A stalk of Holy Soul Grass and a blood core were comparable to completing a yellow grade mission. Chapter 2736. Chapter 2736. Chapter 2736. Saint-level prohibition formation. Bai Ruoju's words excited the crowd. They could not wait to enter the Sacred Soul Valley. However, Bai Ruoju was not done. She smiled and continued, "Everyone, please be quiet and listen to me. The trial in the Sacred Soul Valley is not as simple as you think. The Sacred Soul Grass and the Sacred Soul Bloodwolf are ancient species and are not easy to deal with. Weak martial artists don't provoke these two things. Either of them can easily kill a martial artist at the peak of the divine state. How is that possible?" The crowd was stunned and confused when they heard Bai Ruoju's words. If the Sacred Soul Bloodwolf could kill martial artists, then so be it. But what was the Sacred Soul Grass? How could it kill martial artists? Bai Ruoju did not explain too much and continued, "According to the rules of the school, the first place of the Sacred Soul Valley trial will receive an additional 100 points. Nie Tian's eyes widened when he heard this, and he could not help but exclaim in surprise. 100 points was equivalent to half a drop of sacred qi liquid. In his current state, he would definitely break through if he consumed half a drop of sacred qi liquid. He was determined to be the first place of the Sacred Soul Valley trial. The crowd was shocked when they heard the 100 point. Their eyes lit up and their eyes emitted a red glow. Bai Ruoju smiled and waited for the crowd to calm down before she said, "The trial in the Sacred Soul Valley is very simple. You will enter the valley from the canyon in front of you. 3 days later, the Sacred Soul Valley will close and the formation in the valley will automatically send you out." The crowd nodded and their eyes were filled with excitement. They could not wait any longer. "Okay, let's begin." Bai Ruoju smiled and waved her hand, indicating that everyone could enter the canyon. "I will be first." Just as she finished speaking, one of the cultivators let out a strange cry. Then, his figure moved, and like an arrow released from a bow, he directly rushed out. The others were unwilling to fall behind and followed closely. The entrance of the canyon was large enough to accommodate many martial artists at the same time. Nie Tian and the rest were not in a hurry and watched quietly from the side. In any case, he could enter the Holy Soul Valley for 3 days, so there was no need to rush. After a while, out of the hundreds of thousands of martial artists present, only a few thousand were left. "Let's enter as well." Nie Tian saw that it was about time and said with a faint smile, "Okay." Feng Qi had been waiting impatiently for a long time. After agreeing, he wanted to rush into the canyon. Nie Tian and Si Xiaoya followed closely behind. Soon, everyone entered the canyon, leaving only Bai Ruoju and her group. "I wonder how many of the disciples who entered the Holy Spirit Valley will be able to come out alive." One of the teachers frowned and sighed. Another teacher shook his head and said with a wry smile, "It's good enough to have half of them." The Sacred Soul Valley didn't seem dangerous, but every time a disciple entered, half of them would die inside. "Nie Tian, will you take first place in this trial?" Bai Ruoju looked at the canyon and thought to herself. She had seen Nie Tian's strength, so she knew that Nye Tian would definitely come out alive. What she was more curious about was whether Nye Tian could take first place. In the valley, Nye Tian and the other two dashed into a huge cave with incomparable agility. The cave was very wide, at least 1,000 meters high and a few hundred meters wide. Moreover, the surrounding stone walls were smooth and tidy. It didn't look like it was formed naturally, but more like it was carved by people. The crowd ran wildly in the cave, and everyone rushed forward with all their might. Nye Tian's group of 3 followed the crowd at a moderate pace. Next, the cave began to branch out, and the crowd also began to separate, running in all directions. Nye Tian's group of 3 kept running, and soon, the people around them became fewer and fewer. It turned out that this cave was like the roots of a tree, extending in all directions. After many branches, the crowd dispersed. After running wildly for about half an hour, Nye Tian found that there were only a few hundred people around him. At this rate, there will be no one around us when we enter the Holy Soul Valley. Nye Tian smiled faintly, the corners of his mouth slightly raised, and then deliberately looked for a cave with less people. After a while, there was really no one around Nye Tian. Of course, Feng Qi and Si Xiaoye were still following closely. F***CK. This cave is like a mother**king underground maze. If we keep running like this, when will we reach the end? Feng Qi was a little anxious at this time, and said indignantly. At this time, Si Xiaoye suddenly shouted and said excitedly, "There's light in front, we're going to get out." Nye Tian and Feng Qi looked at each other, and found that it was pitch black all around, without any light at all. But on second thought, Si Xiaoye had the 4th other pupil, the scar of the heavenly Tao, and her perception was far better than theirs. It was naturally not surprising that she could find light. Then, Si Xiaoye led the way and quickly found the exit. Thousands of meters in front of the cave, the light was very dazzling. Nye Tian and the other 2 sped up, and in the blink of an eye, they had already rushed out of the cave. The 3 of them landed on a piece of empty land. "We're finally out." Feng Qi let out a long breath and said with a laugh. Si Xiaoye nodded and said, "I heard that many martial artists who enter the Holy Soul Valley can't even get out of the cave, and waste 3 days in the cave." Nye Tian was speechless, but it was possible. The cave extended in all directions, and it was really a maze. It was normal that many people could not get out of it. Nye Tian took a deep breath, calmed down, and immediately spread out his divine sense to sense the surrounding environment. He immediately found that the space was rich with divine power, and there was also the aura of saint power. It was indeed a primordial ruins. At the same time, he could also sense that there was a powerful restrictive spell in the area that was suppressing his ki meridians. Nye Tian tried to circulate his ki meridians, and was shocked to find that the power he could use was very limited. It seemed that he could only use the strength of a celestial emperor. What a powerful restrictive spell! Nye Tian frowned and exclaimed. He was a peak paramount god, but the restrictive spell had suppressed him to the celestial emperor level. It was obvious how powerful the restrictive spell was. Yes. Si Xiaoye nodded and said, "This restrictive spell is probably from the primordial era. I'm afraid that even a true saint wouldn't be able to withstand it." "It's that powerful?" Feng Qi let out a strange cry, as if he couldn't believe it. If even a saint couldn't withstand the restrictive spell, then it must be a saint-grade restrictive spell. "Fortunately, I have the power of the stars, so I'm not affected by any restrictive spell," Nye Tian thought to himself with a smile. Nye Tian. However, at this moment, Little Fat Cat's voice suddenly rang out, saying, "In this space, you can't use the power of the stars." Nye Tian was taken aback. "Why? You'll know if you can sense the cosmic vital stone," Fat Cat said with a gloomy expression. Nye Tian's eyes narrowed, and he tried to sense the cosmic vital stone. The result made his whole body stiffen. He couldn't sense the cosmic vital stone. It was as if the cosmic vital stone had disappeared from his body. Nie Tian was flabbergasted. His mouth opened slightly, but no sound came out. Chapter 27:37. Chapter 27:37. Saint Soul Blood Wolf. The stellar original stone had disappeared. Nie Tian was dumbfounded. His face was filled with shock as he turned into a wooden statue. He could not sense the presence of the stellar original stone, and there was no aura of star energy in his body. It was as if the stellar original stone and the star energy had disappeared from his body. How is this possible? After staring blankly for a long time, Nie Tian cried out in shock. His eyes were still slightly trembling, and his face was filled with disbelief. If he had lost the stellar original stone on this trip to the Saint Soul Valley, it would have been a great loss. But on second thought, he felt that something was not right. The stellar original stone had long become one with his martial body and had become his 10th yuan meridian. It was impossible for it to disappear. There must be something wrong with the space here, Nie Tian said in his heart. Nie Tian, this space is filled with an invisible force that is obstructing your perception of the star origin stones. The little fat cat's voice rang out at this moment, its face filled with confusion and curiosity. The invisible force in the space was indeed strange. It was able to affect Nie Tian's perception of the stellar original stone. Nie Tian let out a deep breath when he heard Fat Cat's words. The stellar original stone was still there, but he could not sense it. But this meant that he could not use the star energy. This was troublesome. Nie Tian, are you all right? Feng Qi frowned when he saw the strange expression on Nie Tian's face. I'm fine. Nie Tian waved his hand and smiled. The divine power aura here is thick and there is a strong saint energy aura. This is the perfect place to cultivate. Si Xiaoya's lips curled up and she said with a smile. Nie Tian nodded in agreement. He could feel that the divine power aura in the space was 10 times thicker than the outside world. It was also mixed with the aura of saint energy. It was very suitable for cultivators to cultivate. Cultivating here for a day was equivalent to dozens of days in the outside world. However, Nie Tian would not waste his time cultivating here. He could only stay in the Sacred Soul Valley for 3 days. He had to make the best use of his time to hunt the Sacred Soul Blood Wolves and collect the Sacred Soul Grass. Let's go. Taking a deep breath, Nie Tian smiled faintly and prepared to explore the dense forest ahead. The mountain ahead was steep, and there were huge trees everywhere. He should be able to find the Saint Soul Blood Wolf or the Saint Soul Grass. Nie Tian was very much looking forward to seeing what exactly the Holy Soul Blood Wolf and Holy Soul Grass were. The 3 of them moved swiftly as if they were flying, shuttling through the dense forest, and they quickly arrived at the side of a gurgling clear stream. The surrounding environment was quiet and secluded. It was indeed an excellent place for martial artists to cultivate. The 3 of them stopped and prepared to observe. Ah! At this moment, a shrill and miserable howl rang out from the dense forest behind them. Nie Tian frowned and looked at the dense forest behind him. Be careful. Si Xiaoye seemed to have discovered something. Her beautiful eyes flickered as she cried out in alarm. Whoosh! In the next moment, a crimson silhouette emerged from the dense forest. Like a headless fly, it frantically ran for its life. Nie Tian took a closer look. The crimson silhouette was actually a person. One of his arms was broken and half of his body was a mess of blood and flesh. He looked extremely pathetic. Help! The person saw Nie Tian and the others and hurriedly shouted. Then, the silhouette dashed towards Nie Tian and the others. Roar! At this moment, a low roar was heard. Then, a crimson silhouette appeared at an extremely fast speed. Like a sharp arrow, it pounced towards the person with the broken arm. Nie Tian could clearly see that the crimson silhouette was about 5 to 6 meters long. It was a crimson blood wolf. 2 fangs were protruding from its mouth, and it looked extremely ferocious. Without a doubt, this crimson blood wolf was the Saint Soul Blood Wolf that Bai Ruozhu had mentioned. Nie Tian was slightly surprised. He did not expect the Saint's Soul Blood Wolf to be so small. However, he could also feel that although the Saint's Soul Blood Wolf's body was small, its aura was extremely ferocious. It exuded a terrifying aura, and its sharp claws and fangs shone with a cold light as if it could tear everything apart. If the Saint's Soul Blood Wolf landed, the cultivator with the broken arm would definitely die. In the blink of an eye, Nye Tian reacted. He stamped his feet against the ground, leaped into the air, and punched out. Bang! In midair, a shadow of a fist appeared. Like a giant rock, it heavily bombarded the Saint's Soul Blood Wolf. With a muffled sound, the Saint's Soul Blood Wolf was directly sent flying and smashed into the ground. Seeing this, Feng Qi took a step forward and came to the cultivator with the broken arm. He asked in a low voice, "Student, are you all right?" I'm fine." The cultivator was stunned for a moment and then waved his hand. Roar. At that moment, the Saint's Soul Blood Wolf stood up again. Its blood-red eyes stared at Nye Tian, and it let out a low growl. Nye Tian could not help but frown when he saw this. He could not conceal the surprise on his face. His previous punch was enough to shatter a mountain, but it was completely unharmed when it landed on the Saint's Soul Blood Wolf. The Saint's Soul Blood Wolf's body was indeed very strong. "Student, you have to be careful. This beast is extremely ferocious and cannot be killed." The cultivator with the broken arm looked at Nye Tian and reminded him loudly. Nye Tian nodded. His eyes were fixed on the Saint's Soul Blood Wolf, and he did not dare to be careless. Roar. At that moment, the Saint's Soul Blood Wolf's eyes suddenly flashed with a crimson glow. Its body moved and its two front claws were like sharp swords that slashed across the void and attacked Nye Tian. Nye Tian frowned and his figure suddenly retreated. Puff, puff. In the next moment, two streaks of blood-colored light appeared and brushed past Nye Tian, leaving two faint, bloody marks on his chest. What a ferocious beast! Nye Tian stood still and frowned. He became even more cautious. The Saint's Soul Blood Wolf not only had a strong body, but it was also extremely fast and lethal. Fortunately, Nye Tian had dodged in time. Otherwise, he would have been seriously injured even if he had a strong martial body. "Nye Tian, are you all right?" Feng Qi shouted anxiously when he saw that Nye Tian was injured. "I'm fine," Nye Tian replied. His eyes flickered coldly as he stared at the Saint's Soul Blood Wolf. He could not sense the existence of the Star Original Stone, so he could not use the Star Heaven Slash. Therefore, his combat strength was greatly reduced. Moreover, his strength had been suppressed to the Heavenly Emperor realm by the power of the restriction. He really couldn't be careless when facing a Saint's Soul Blood Wolf of unknown rank. Roar. At that instant, the Saint's Soul Blood Wolf let out another roar and leaped into the air. It pounced at Nye Tian like a fireball. Nye Tian's eyes narrowed slightly. He moved aside and charged forward. In the next instant, his figure landed on the Saint's Soul Blood Wolf's back. "Bastard, die for me!" He steadied his figure and twitched his lips. He condensed a sword intent in his palm and stabbed at the back of the Saint's Soul Blood Wolf's head. Normally, the back of the head of various spiritual beasts and divine beasts had the weakest defense. Once it was struck, it could easily be fatal. However, Nye Tian had guessed wrong this time. Chapter 27:38. Another purpose. Nye Tian went blank for a moment before exclaiming, "How is this possible?" Roar. As for the Saint's Spirit Blood Wolf, it was completely enraged by him. It let out a wild roar and released waves of blood-red light from its body. Struck by the blood-colored light, Nye Tian lost his footing and was sent flying backward, smashing through several huge trees. After he landed, he retreated dozens of meters before he managed to regain his footing. Boom! At that moment, the Blood Wolf Saint Spirit pounced at Nye Tian. Its sharp claws shone with a cold light as it tried to tear Nye Tian into pieces. Nye Tian felt danger approaching. His eyes narrowed and the 9 dragon veins in his body began to churn. The dragon chi around him was extremely violent. However, before he could make a move, two sharp lights suddenly appeared in the sky and accurately bombarded the eyes of the Saint Spirit Blood Wolf. Immediately, the Blood Wolf's eyes exploded and its entire head became a bloody mess. Awoh! The Blood Wolf Saint Spirit was still in the air, and let out a miserable howl. Then, it fell to the ground and its blood-red body twitched for a while before it stopped moving. He's dead. Nye Tian was flabbergasted. He had spent so much effort and yet he could not kill the Blood Wolf Saint Spirit. However, the Blood Wolf Saint Spirit's eyes were destroyed and it died. At that moment, Si Xiaoya stepped forward and looked at Nye Tian calmly. The Blood Wolf Saint Spirit's weakness is its eyes. As long as its eyes are destroyed, it will die for sure. Just now, she was the one who killed the Blood Wolf Saint Spirit. Thank you. Nye Tian's eyes narrowed and he thanked her awkwardly. He did not see how Si Xiaoya did it. She must have used the power of the mark of the heavenly path. Just as Nye Tian was feeling puzzled, the fat cat's voice rang out and said in a deep voice, "Heavenly Dao Scar, how strange." Nye Tian frowned. It seemed that the fat cat had seen through it. Si Xiaoya had indeed used the power of the heavenly Dao. With a faint smile, Si Xiaoya said proudly, "Nye Tian, this blood wolf is a gift from me." "Thanks." Nye Tian nodded. He took a step forward and blasted open the back of the Saint Soul Blood Wolf's head, extracting a blood core the size of an infant's fist. He sensed the aura within the blood core. It was extremely violent and contained great power. One Saint Spirit Blood Wolf's blood core is worth 2 points. Nye Tian smiled faintly and put the blood core away. His purpose for coming to the Holy Soul Valley this time was very simple. It was to obtain points. Si Xiaoya walked over to Nye Tian and said with a faint smile, "Nye Tian, it seems that you really want to earn points," Nye Tian said. "Yes." Nye Tian did not hide it and said directly, "I want to use points to exchange for the Holy Qi liquid." "Oh, I see." Si Xiaoya smiled and said, "I don't have points anymore. Otherwise, I could help you exchange for the Holy Qi liquid." "No need. I still owe you a big favor from last time. I don't want to owe you too much." Nye Tian smiled faintly and turned to leave. "Nye Tian, I can give you all the blood cores and Saint Soul grass I obtained in the Holy Soul Valley," Si Xiaoya suddenly said with her beautiful eyes flashing. Nye Tian was stunned for a moment, then smiled and looked at Si Xiaoya with bright eyes. "Miss Xiaoya, you don't look like someone who does good things for free. You won't help me for free, will you?" "Of course." Si Xiaoya raised an eyebrow and said without pretense, "I want you to accompany me to a place to find something." Nye Tian's eyes narrowed and the corners of his mouth curled up into a smile, but he did not speak immediately. He could see that Si Xiaoya did not enter the Holy Soul Valley to obtain points, but had another purpose. "What do you think? Do you agree?" Si Xiaoya asked again when she saw that Nye Tian did not speak. "Miss Xiaoya, if I don't accompany you to that place, you will go yourself?" Nye Tian laughed and asked. "Of course." Si Xiaoya nodded and smiled. With a bitter smile, Nye Tian glanced at Feng Qi and said, "If that's the case, I have no choice but to go with you." Although he did not know where Si Xiaoya was going and what she was looking for, he could guess that the thing Si Xiaoya was looking for must be extraordinary. However, he could guess that the thing Si Xiaoya wanted to find was certainly not ordinary, so this trip would be extremely dangerous. Feng Qi could not let Si Xiaoya take the risk alone, so he would definitely go with her. Thus, Nye Tian could only follow. "Okay, it's decided." At that moment, Feng Qi walked over and said with a hearty laugh, "We'll give all the blood cores and Saint Soul grasses we've found so far to Nye Tian. Then, the three of us will go find the thing Xiaoya wants." Nye Tian glanced at Feng Qi and said with a faint smile, "Feng Qi, both of us have gained something. What can you find along the way?" Nye Tian wanted the blood cores and sacred soul grass, while Si Xiaoya wanted to find other things. However, Feng Qi found nothing. He. Feng Qi laughed and looked at Si Xiaoya with a pair of malicious eyes. I've obtained a wife as beautiful as a flower. Nie Tian's face darkened and was speechless. Si Xiaoya rolled her eyes at Feng Qi and was too lazy to pay attention to him. Next, Nie Tian's group did not linger and immediately left for the dense forest. As for the one-armed guy, they could only help him until here. Nie Tian had his own things to do, so he couldn't bring a burden with him. Whether this guy with a broken arm could survive 3 days in the Holy Soul Valley would depend on his own ability. As long as he stayed obediently and did not provoke other things, his chances of survival were still very high. Nie Tian's group of 3 entered the forest and walked at a steady pace, constantly observing the surroundings. Be careful. At this time, Si Xiaoya seemed to have discovered something and secretly warned Nie Tian and Feng Qi. Nie Tian and Feng Qi immediately became vigilant and leaned back together, sensing everything around them. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. Immediately, there was a burst of rushing sounds in the surroundings, as if something was flying towards Nie Tian's group. In the next moment, more than a dozen scarlet figures appeared, bearing fangs at the corners of their mouth. They were extremely fierce and ferocious. It was the sacred soul blood wolf. F***ck. So many came at once. When Feng Qi saw this lineup, he could not help but let out a strange cry, his expression instantly becoming nervous. Nie Tian's brows furrowed as he looked at the dozen sacred soul blood wolves. These sacred soul blood wolves had minced meat hanging at the corners of their mouths, still dripping with blood. Obviously, they had just eaten a full meal. They must have just slaughtered a few cultivators, and now was the most ferocious time. Roar, roar, roar. The dozen sacred soul blood wolves all had fierce looks in their eyes. Finally, they could not bear it any longer and leaped at the same time. Like a dozen scarlet flames, they extended their sharp claws and fiercely pounced towards Nie Tian's group for 3 days. Chapter 2739. Chapter 2739. Chapter 279. Violent and ferocious, the look in Nie Tian's eyes instantly became resolute. They were currently facing a dozen blood wolves. If they were not careful, they would die on the spot and become food for the blood wolves. Annihilation Earth Seal, open. In the blink of an eye, Nie Tian reacted. He formed hand seals, and the space in front of him trembled slightly. The ground in front of him split open, and a piece of earth rose up like a small hill, smashing towards the dozen Saint Soul blood wolves. Bang, bang, bang. A series of muffled sounds were heard in the air as the blood wolves were sent flying. Let's kill one first. Nie Tian's figure suddenly moved. He took a step forward and aimed at a Saint Soul blood wolf that was still in midair. He directly condensed his sword chi into a sword, and 2 sharp blades whizzed out. Puff, puff. Before the Saint Soul blood wolf could react, its 2 bloodthirsty eyes exploded. After it fell to the ground, it struggled a few times and died. Awesome. Feng Qi was taken aback by the scene in front of him. It took him quite a while to recover from his shock, and he gave Nie Tian a thumbs up. Nie Tian's lips twitched and he growled, "Attack!" Although the Annihilation Earth Seal didn't severely injure the Saint Soul blood wolves, it sent them flying. Before the blood wolves regained their footing, it was the best time for Nie Tian and the rest to attack. Nie Tian's figure was extremely fast as he charged into the pack of wolves. Sword intent surged around him, and the sky was filled with sword shadows that attacked the wolves. Bang, bang, bang. Puff, puff, puff. In the next instant, countless muffled sounds of flesh and blood exploding could be heard. Several blood wolves could not avoid the sword shadows and died on the spot with their eyes torn open. However, the other Saint Soul blood wolves covered their eyes. When the sword shadows landed on their bodies, it was like scratching an itch. As Nie Tian landed, he was surrounded by several blood wolves. Roar! A Saint Soul blood wolf let out a low roar and charged straight at Nie Tian. It opened its huge mouth and wanted to swallow Nie Tian alive. Bastard, what a big appetite you have! Nietion's eyes narrowed as he growled and threw a punch. A fist shadow the size of a small hill appeared and pressed down violently, blocking the saint's spirit blood wolf. Nietion, be careful! Feng-chi shouted to remind Nietion. Nietion's eyes narrowed as he felt a cold breeze on his back. He didn't have time to turn around and immediately retreated, but he was still a step too late. Pooh! Two blood-red beams of light fell and directly bombarded Nietion's back. Two bloody wounds appeared. They were so deep that bones could be seen and blood flowed freely. Nietion's body moved several meters forward, and then he stopped. He felt a sharp pain from his back, and beads of sweat appeared on his forehead. The wounds caused by the Saint's Soul blood wolves were very strange. They were not ordinary wounds, but a burning pain. Nietion felt like his body was on fire and he was about to explode. Roar! At that moment, a Saint's Soul blood wolf let out a strange cry as two sharp claws appeared and swiped at Nietion. Upon seeing this, Si Xiaoye and Feng-chi simultaneously exclaimed, Nietion! Immediately afterwards, they blurred into action in an attempt to save Nietion. However, in midair, several Saint's Soul blood wolves pounced at them with ferocious auras. The two's expressions changed. They could only turn around to deal with the situation. There was no way they could save Nietion. Nietion's eyes narrowed when he saw the Saint's Soul blood wolves pouncing at him. He then stomped his feet and soared into the sky. At that moment, a strange scene took place as the Saint's Soul blood wolf's claws landed. Bang! Hovering in midair, Nietion raised his hand and blocked the Saint's spirit blood wolf's huge paw with brute force. Die! Then, he punched the Saint's Soul blood wolf in one of its eyes. Blood and flesh splattered everywhere, creating a bloody scene. Roar! The Saint's Soul blood wolf howled in pain. Its cry was ear-piercing. Nietion did not care at all. He punched again and destroyed the other eye of the Saint's Soul blood wolf. Bang! The Saint's Soul blood wolf that was 5 to 6 meters long fell heavily to the ground and died after struggling for a while. Damn! It's so fierce! Feng-chi happened to see this scene. He was startled and let out a strange scream. Just now, Nietion had used his physical body to fight against the Saint's Soul blood wolf. It was too exaggerated. He could not believe that Nietion's martial body was stronger than the Saint's Soul blood wolf's body. Nietion's figure landed. His eyes were filled with doubt and astonishment. After he was injured by the Saint's Soul blood wolf, the Saint's Soul curse in his body seemed to have gone berserk, causing his martial body to suddenly become much stronger. Otherwise, if he fought with the Saint's Soul blood wolf, even if he did not die, he would be half crippled. At that moment, he felt the Saint's Soul curse in his body become abnormally active. It ran rampant in his body, making him feel as if his power was about to explode. Roar! Just as Nietion was feeling bewildered, a Saint's Soul blood wolf suddenly growled and pounced towards him. You're courting death. Nietion's eyes narrowed and he immediately reacted. He suddenly turned around and stomped his feet. Like a wild beast, he rushed over. Bang! In the next moment, Nietion's body collided with the Saint's Soul blood wolf. With a muffled sound, the Saint's Soul blood wolf was sent flying and smashed through several huge trees. How did my martial body suddenly become so strong? Nietion's figure landed. His eyes suddenly narrowed and his face was filled with disbelief. He actually had the upper hand when he fought with the Saint's Soul blood wolf head-on. It was too strange. Standing off to the side, Si Xiaoye and Feng-chi were also flabbergasted by this scene. Their eyes were filled with astonishment, as if they were looking at a monster. Awoo! Then, a Saint's Soul blood wolf let out a strange howl and pounced at Nietion. Get lost! Nietion frowned and threw a punch. The fist shadow landed on the Saint's Soul blood wolf's body and broke one of its forearms. Seeing this, Nietion moved. Two sword shadows appeared and shattered the Saint's Soul blood wolf's eyes. Then, the murderous intent in his eyes intensified. His body moved quickly like a wild beast, and he directly charged at the Saint's soul blood wolf. Everywhere he passed, the Saint's soul blood wolves fell to the ground and died. In the blink of an eye, more than 10 Saint's soul blood wolves had died tragically at Nie Tian's hands. Si Xiaoye and Feng Qi were completely stunned by the scene in front of them. They looked at Nie Tian in a daze, completely speechless. Not long ago, Nie Tian encountered his first Saint's soul blood wolf and was almost injured. But now, Nie Tian was slaughtering the Saint's soul blood wolves like he was slaughtering chicks. What is going on? Half a day later, Feng Qi came to his senses and asked in astonishment, how did this guy suddenly become even more violent than a vicious beast? Roar. Right at this moment, Nie Tian suddenly raised his head. His eyes were bloodshot, and he actually let out a low roar like a wild beast. His whole body surged with a fierce aura, and he looked extremely terrifying, like a fierce beast that had just been released from a cage. Chapter 2740. Out of control. Feng Qi and Si Xiaoye looked at Nie Tian with trembling eyes. At this moment, they felt that Nie Tian's expression was very strange, especially his eyes. They didn't even look like those of a human, but like those of a beast. At this moment, the murderous aura around Nie Tian was very terrifying, as if he was going to kill everything in front of him. Nie Tian. Feng Qi frowned and tried to call out, but Nie Tian didn't respond at all. His eyes were extremely fierce, and he walked towards him. What's going on? Feng Qi was so scared that his face turned pale and he screamed. He's out of control. Si Xiaoye's eyes trembled and she said in a low voice, out of control? Feng Qi was stunned and he asked in shock, why would he lose control? It's because of the Holy Soul curse seal in his body. Si Xiaoye's beautiful eyes were gloomy, and she stepped back slightly, looking very careful. She had long known that there was a Holy Soul curse seal in Nie Tian's body, and she also knew how terrifying the Holy Soul curse seal would be when it was activated. Holy Soul curse seal, what the hell is that? Feng Qi was confused, and he actually wanted to get close to Nie Tian. Idiot, do you want to die? Si Xiaoye quickly stepped forward, pulled Feng Qi and scolded him cold. Feng Qi was confused, and he had no idea what was going on. Roar. At this moment, Nie Tian let out a low roar again, and then he moved. He threw a punch and the fierce fist shadow blasted towards Feng Qi. Damn. He's really out of control. Feng Qi's eyes narrowed, and he screamed, and then he quickly stepped back, barely dodging the fist shadow. At this moment, Nie Tian had already approached him, and he was less than 10 meters away from him. Die. Nie Tian's eyes were filled with killing intent. He spat out the word die and dashed forward. Feng Qi frowned when he felt the sharp and murderous aura rushing towards him. The ardent wind spear appeared in his hand and pierced forward. Bang! The spear struck out like a dragon. The spear's shadow was vast and powerful, causing space to tremble slightly. However, when it struck Nie Tian's body, it didn't have the slightest effect and directly shattered. Nie Tian's current martial body was even stronger than the Saint's spirit blood wolf. Feng Qi's attack did not pose any threat to him. F***CK. Feng Qi shouted and retreated again, but it was too late. Boom. Nie Tian came to his side and punched him hard. Nie Tian's current state was completely out of control. If this punch landed on Feng Qi, the latter would be crippled even if he didn't die. At this moment of life and death, Si Xiaoye made her move. Her hands formed a strange seal, and suddenly, a bright white moon appeared and shrouded Nie Tian, trapping him within it. Nie Tian's body froze, and his fist stopped in midair. Nie Tian. Upon seeing this, Feng Qi went blank for a moment before he took a step forward and called out, hoping to wake Nie Tian up. Idiot, run! Si Xiaoye scolded. She couldn't wait to throw Feng Qi away. Roar! 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 Nie Tian was trapped by the bright white moon, and he let out a deep roar. His eyes were bloodshot, and he looked extremely ferocious. Feng Qi gulped and did not dare to stay any longer. He retreated to Si Xiaoya's side and said, "Thank you, my dear, for saving my life. This guy is still in the mood to joke at a time like this." Si Xiaoya didn't pay any attention to him. Instead, she fixed her eyes on Nie Tian and exerted all of her strength to hold him down. However, Nie Tian struggled with all his might, and his physical strength was released wildly. The bright white moon around him immediately cracked, and it looked like it was going to break at any time. "Oh no!" Si Xiaoya frowned and said nervously, "He's too strong. I can't hold on for much longer." "Then what should we do?" Feng Qi frowned, and his eyes were trembling slightly. He sensed that Nie Tian was wreathed in killing intent and a ruthless aura, as if he were a killing machine. If Si Xiaoya could not control Nie Tian, she and Feng Qi would be in danger. Si Xiaoya tried her best to hold on, but her strength was slowly weakening, while Nie Tian's strength was slowly getting stronger. Nie Tian's silver hair fluttered, and his murderous aura surged like a god of death. In his body, the holy soul curse mark became even more violent. His martial body had almost reached its limit, and he could not take it anymore. And in the next moment, a strange and bloody scene happened. Pow! 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 Nie Tian's body suddenly burst open, and blood sprayed out wildly, causing his entire body to instantly become bloody. When Feng Qi saw this, his eyes trembled and he gasped in shock. At this moment, he knew how dangerous Nie Tian's situation was. He had also sensed that there was a terrifying power madly battering Nie Tian's body, which was on the verge of tearing him apart. The holy soul curse mark in his body is getting stronger. If this continues, his martial body will not be able to take it and it will explode. Si Xiaoya's beautiful eyes flickered, and her petite face was extremely nervous as she said in a deep voice, What should we do? How can we save him?" Feng Qi was scared out of his wits, and his voice was trembling. Si Xiaoya tried her best to hold on, and her pretty face was flushed red. It was obvious that she could not hold on for much longer. "I can only take a gamble." The next moment, her eyes suddenly focused, and she suddenly growled at Feng Qi. "Feng Qi, use your strongest move to attack Nie Tian." Really? Feng Qi was stunned, and he said in astonishment, "We're going to kill Nie Tian?" "Idiot, do as I say." Si Xiaoya was too lazy to explain to Feng Qi, and said in a cold tone. When Feng Qi heard that Si Xiaoya wanted him to use his strongest move to attack Nie Tian, he knew that she was going to kill Nie Tian in the future. However, he did not know that Si Xiaoya did not want to kill Nie Tian, but rather, she wanted to make a last stand. With Feng Qi's current strength, even if he used his strongest move, he would not be able to kill Nie Tian. "Okay." Feng Qi agreed and did not dare to say anything else. His silhouette moved and he dashed into midair. He raised the ardent wind sword in his hand, and spear intent surged around him, as if he was the god of spears descending to the mortal world. Ardent wind strike, god slaying. In the next moment, he let out a low roar, and looked at Nie Tian with a gloomy expression. Immediately after, the ardent wind sword struck out with his spear, and a 1,000-meter-long spear shadow appeared. It was like a mad dragon, and it swooped down towards Nie Tian. Boom! The spear shadow rushed into the sky, and a terrifying rumble sounded, as if it wanted to destroy the heaven and earth. Nie Tian stood on the ground, and the aura around him was violent, and his eyes were filled with killing intent. He wanted to counterattack, but he was trapped by the white moon. Boom! Chi. In the next moment the spear shadow fell, and landed on Nie Tian's body. The space suddenly stagnated, and the spear shadow started to crumble, and could not hurt Nie Tian at all. This is the time. At this moment, Si Xiaoya's silhouette moved at an extremely fast speed, and she actually dashed straight towards Nie Tian. "Xiao Yu!" Feng Qi saw this scene, and his eyes trembled, and he shouted in fear. However, Si Xiaoya's silhouette had already dashed over, and she was only 5 meters away from Nie Tian. Roar! Nie Tian's eyes trembled, and he let out a low roar, and was about to attack. However, at this moment, Si Xiaoya's eyes suddenly changed. Her pupils suddenly turned green, and waves of green light appeared. Chapter 27:41. Boom! Rumble! 2 vortexes of eye power shot directly into Nie Tian's eyes. Nie Tian's arm, which was raised in the air, suddenly stopped. Immediately after, his whole body seemed to suddenly stiffen, and he fell straight to the ground, lying on the ground. The violent aura around him quickly disappeared, and the fierceness in his eyes also slowly disappeared. His sharp eyes gradually recovered, and his sole consciousness became sober. Si Xiaoya, who was beside him, swayed and fell to the ground. Xiaoya! Fengqi cried out when he saw Si Xiaoya suddenly fall. He landed beside her and asked nervously, "Are you okay?" Si Xiaoya supported her body with difficulty and waved her hand weakly, indicating that she was fine. But at this time blood flowed out from the corner of her eyes, and her face was frighteningly pale. It was obvious that she had overused the marks of Heaven Dao and suffered a backlash. But Si Xiaoya didn't dare to relax at this time. She carefully sensed Nie Tian's body, and only relaxed after confirming that the sacred soul seal had calmed down. At this time, Nie Tian woke up and slowly stood up. He looked puzzled and murmured, "What happened?" "Nie Tian, you're finally back to normal." Fengqi saw that Nie Tian had recovered and let out a long breath. His tense nerves immediately relaxed. "Si Xiaoya, what happened to your eyes?" Nie Tian asked with a frown when he saw that Si Xiaoya's eyes were bleeding. "I'm fine. I'll be fine as long as you recover." Si Xiaoya forced a smile and waved her hand. Then, Nie Tian saw the corpses of the Saint's soul blood wolves on the ground and asked with a blank expression, "What happened just now? How did these Saint soul blood wolves die?" He didn't remember anything that happened just now. He only remembered that the holy soul curse mark in his body had suddenly become stronger. He had no memory of when it happened after that. "You killed all these Saint soul blood wolves?" Fengqi was speechless as he briefly explained what had happened. After listening, Nie Tian was stunned. Took him a long time to react. "Nie Tian, it was really dangerous this time," Dongli said. At this moment, the fat cat's voice sounded, and it said with lingering fear, "Fortunately, this little girl is a heavenly Dao scar, otherwise, you would have died to the holy soul curse mark." This. Nie Tian sucked in a breath of cold air and couldn't help but feel scared. Half a day later, he calmed down and walked to Si Xiaoya's side, saying solemnly, "Miss Xiaoya, thank you for saving my life. You don't have to thank me. What I want is your repayment." Si Xiaoya had recovered a little and said with a calm smile, "Yes." Nie Tian nodded heavily and said, "I will help you find what you want. I will also return the favor that I owe you." "That's good." Si Xiaoya smiled faintly, looking calm. In fact, she didn't have a choice in the situation just now. If she didn't save Nie Tian, she and Fengqi would have been killed by Nie Tian. Nie Tian let out a long breath and looked at the wounds all over his body. He was puzzled. Why did the Holy Soul curse mark suddenly go out of control? The Saint Soul Blood Wolf's aura is somewhat similar to the Holy Soul curse mark. I believe that there must be a connection between the two. Fat Cat's voice sounded and said solemnly. Nie Tian nodded. That was exactly what he was thinking. He remembered that after his back was torn by the Saint Soul Blood Wolf, the Holy Soul curse mark in his body became active. It was the Saint Soul Blood Wolf that stimulated the Holy Soul curse mark in Nie Tian's body. What was the relationship between the Saint Soul Blood Wolf and the Holy Soul curse mark? Nie Tian, don't think too much. You should rest well and take care of your injuries, Fat Cat said. Nie Tian thought for a moment and could only nod. He knew nothing about the Holy Soul curse mark and the Saint Soul Blood Wolf, so it was useless to think too much. However, Si Xiaoye seemed to understand the Holy Soul curse mark quite well. It was just that she didn't want to explain too much to Nie Tian. Next, Nie Tian first took out the blood nuclei of a dozen Saint Soul blood wolves. There were a total of 14 blood nuclei. Adding the one from before, he had a total of 15 blood nuclei, which was 30 points. Nie Tian was very satisfied. As long as he killed another 35 Saint Soul blood wolves or collected 70 Saint Soul grass, he would be able to exchange for half a drop of holy liquid. Next, Nie Tian sat cross-legged on the ground and began to recover from his injuries. After a few hours, Nie Tian stood up again. All the wounds on his body had completely healed, and his aura had also recovered. Si Xiaoye had also more or less recovered. However, her scar of the heavenly way had been severely depleted. She wouldn't be able to use it for a while. Let's go. Si Xiaoye smiled faintly and prepared to leave. However, just as she was about to leave, she seemed to notice something. Her pretty face changed slightly and her eyebrows knitted together. What's wrong? Feng Qi sensed that something was wrong and asked Si Xiaoye. Someone is coming. Si Xiaoye's beautiful eyes narrowed as she looked at the dense forest in front of her. Not long after she landed, a figure in white appeared. He held a folding fan in his hand and descended from the sky. It's you. When Nie Tian saw the cultivator in white, he couldn't help but frown and his eyes darkened. The person who appeared was none other than the guy Nie Tian and the others had met before entering the Holy Soul Valley. He was Chen Shuaibin, who was ranked third among the outer sect's 10 tigers. Before entering the Holy Soul Valley, Chen Shuaibin had tried to flirt with Si Xiaoye and was scolded by Feng Qi. He had once said that after entering the Holy Soul Valley, Feng Qi and the others would definitely die. And now, he had finally appeared. I was wondering who it was. Turns out to be a mad dog. Feng Qi looked at Chen Shuaibin and said with a cold smile. Si Xiaoye's pretty face darkened and she didn't say anything. What's wrong? You guys aren't happy to see this young master appear. Chen Shuaibin's evil eyes swept over Nie Tian and the others. His lips curled into a malicious smile as he spoke in an extremely provocative manner. A mad dog running over and barking in front of you. It would be strange if you were happy. Feng Qi responded with a cold smile. He didn't take Chen Shuaibin seriously at all. Huh! Chen Shuaibin's face darkened. A pair of cold eyes stared at Feng Qi and said coldly, Brat, this is the Holy Soul Valley. How dare you speak to this young master like this? Aren't you afraid that this young master will kill you? I'm so scared. Feng Qi curled his lips and pretended to be afraid. However, his eyes were extremely cold and contemptuous as he said, A mad dog like you wants to kill me? That's a fool's dream. You! Chen Shuaibin's eyes darkened. A murderous intent flashed in his eyes as he said in a cold voice, Brat, this young master originally only wanted to teach you a lesson. But now this young master has changed his mind. Changed your mind? Feng Qi sneered. He raised his eyebrows and provoked, What do you want? To kill you. Chen Shuaibin's voice was cold. These two words were squeezed out from between his teeth. His eyes were sinister and vicious as if he wanted to eat Feng Qi alive. Chapter 2742. The way of the sword. Chen Shuaibin's eyes were piercingly cold as he stared at Feng Qi. His gaze was so cold that it made one shudder. It seems like you really want to kill me. Feng Qi looked at Chen Shuaibin with a faint smile, as if he didn't see Chen Shuaibin as a threat. Feeling Feng Qi's contempt, Chen Shuaibin's face turned even colder. Young man, if you can walk out of the Valley of the Holy Soul alive, my name isn't Chen Shuaibin, he said coldly. Then I'll call you Mad Dog Chen. Feng Qi raised an eyebrow and smiled arrogantly. You're courting death. Chen Shuaibin couldn't hold it in any longer. With a low growl, his entire body emitted an incomparably violent saber will. It was as sharp as a blade and whistled through the air, as if it could tear everything apart. Legendary blade wielder. Nie Tian could not help but frown when he saw this, and his eyes suddenly narrowed. He didn't think that Chen Shuaibin would be a saber-wielder who had reached the legendary realm of the unification of sword and martial arts. The strength of his saber will was terrifying. The sword was sharp, the saber was powerful. Chen Shuaibin's saber intent surged in the air like a raging wave, surging and devouring the sky with an overwhelming aura. Chen Shuaibin, are you crazy? Just then, Si Xiaoya's voice rang out. You dare to kill a fellow disciple. This is against the rules of the Holy Soul Academy. Do you think I care about this? Chen Shuaibin smiled coldly. The corner of his mouth curled up and his eyes flickered with a cold light. Boom! In the next moment, his silhouette moved and he made his move. A black broadsword appeared in his hand, and he slashed towards Feng Qi. An infinite amount of saber will surged out and formed a terrifying shadow of a saber that slashed towards Feng Qi. Feng Qi's eyes narrowed. Feng Yunlai made his move, and the shadow of a spear pounced towards Chen Shuaibin like a beast. Bang! Then, the shadow of the saber and the shadow of the spear collided. A loud noise exploded in the air, as if metal and stone had collided. Boom! In the next instant, the terrifying saber will and spear will exploded at the same time, turning into raging waves that crashed into the void. Feng Qi's body trembled and he was sent flying. After all, he was not as strong as Chen Shuaibin. Moreover, a bladesman had the upper hand in a head-on confrontation. Feng Qi's figure was sent flying. His whole body was still in mid-air when he spat out a mouthful of blood. Die. When Chen Shuaibin saw this, the corner of his lips curled up. Cold laughter could be heard as his silhouette moved once again, breaking through the layers of raging waves and slashing downwards. A tyrannical saber intent slashed through the air, slashing towards Feng Qi. This saber strike was extremely powerful. If it landed on Feng Qi's back, the latter would definitely die without a corpse. Feng Qi. Si Xiaoya's beautiful eyes trembled as her heart skipped a beat. She then shouted out loud. At this moment, Feng Qi was still in midair. In an instant, he felt an incomparably realistic murderous intent coming towards him. Instantly, he felt a chill run down his spine. However, he could still be considered calm. At this critical moment, his eyes trembled and a huge amount of ocular force gushed out, forming a doomsday vortex around him. It was like a shield, enveloping his entire body. At this moment, he had no other choice but to rely on the doomsday eye. Perhaps he might be able to preserve his life. Boom! At this moment, the tyrannical saber descended like a huge wave crashing down. The saber will in the air surged, its aura was like a tsunami. The doomsday vortex around Feng Qi's body shook violently. After that, it could no longer support itself and directly collapsed. His body suddenly sank and he fell heavily towards the ground. At this moment, a silhouette suddenly appeared. An endless amount of energy supported Feng Qi. Nie Tian. Feng Qi turned around and saw the silhouette in front of him. It was Nie Tian. Nie Tian nodded slightly as a shudder ran through his body. Then, something strange happened. Suddenly, 9 enormous chains appeared inside of him, which shot out like enormous snakes, twisting together to form a shield in front of him and Feng Qi BM. A muffled boom echoed out as Nie Tian and Feng Qi were sent flying backward, leaving a trail in the ground that was dozens of meters long. However, the two of them were still standing there. As soon as Chen Shuaibin landed, he fixed his eyes on Nie Tian with a surprised look in his eyes. As of this moment, he was truly looking at Nie Tian. Earlier, before entering Holy Soul Valley, Chen Shuaibin had only glanced at Nie Tian and hadn't paid him any attention at all. Moments ago, he hadn't even paid attention to Nie Tian. Instead, he had focused all of his hatred on Feng Qi. He had long since sensed that Nie Tian only had the strength of a peak paramount god. In his eyes, a martial artist with that level of strength was nothing more than trash. He had always thought that Nie Tian was just Feng Qi's lackey. However, just now, Nye Tian had appeared out of nowhere and blocked his saber strike. This had surprised and even shocked him a little. He was one of the 10 strongest people in the outer court, and ranked 3rd in the entire outer court. But now, he couldn't even kill a peak paramount god martial artist. How could he not be shocked? Chen Shuaibin calmed down a little, and stared at Nye Tian with a cold expression. "Kid, what's your name?" Nye Tian said indifferently, neither servile nor overbearing. Nye Tian. Chen Shuaibin frowned, then laughed and said, "So you're the one who defeated Tian Zhuowen. No wonder you're so strong." He didn't know who Nye Tian was, but he had heard of the name. Nye Tian had defeated Tian Zhuowen in the Saint Soul test. This news had long since spread throughout the outer court, and even many people in the inner court and core court knew the name Nye Tian. Chen Shuaibin also knew that after Nye Tian had completed the Saint Soul test, the Starry Sky Pavilion Master had appeared and taken him away. Although no one knew why the Starry Sky Pavilion Master had taken Nye Tian away, everyone knew that it meant that Nye Tian was valued by the higher-ups of the academy. "Chen Shuaibin, you're one of the top 3 experts in the outer court. I don't want to become enemies with you. Let's put this matter to rest," Nye Tian said indifferently, looking at Chen Shuaibin. "Put this matter to rest?" Chen Shuaibin couldn't help but laugh when he heard Nye Tian's words. He laughed arrogantly and disdainfully. He looked at Nye Tian as if he was looking at an idiot and said cold, "Nye Tian, do you think that you can disregard me just because you defeated Tian Zhuowen? Tian Zhuowen lost to you in terms of talent, which only proves that you're very talented. However, it's hard to say how strong you are. Today, I'll see how strong you are, since you've alarmed the Starry Sky Pavilion Master." The blade aura around his body surged again. Suddenly, the aura in the surrounding space changed, and a faint layer of water appeared in the air. It was very mysterious. "Huh!" Nye Tian felt the change in space and couldn't help but narrow his eyes. He said in a low voice, "Blade intent boundary." He hadn't expected Chen Shuaibin to be able to activate the blade intent boundary under such circumstances. Chapter 2743. Extreme Waterfall. Chen Shuaibin's eyes were as cold as ice as he stared at Nye Tian with murderous intent. Nye Tian's face darkened slightly. He could feel that Chen Shuaibin's murderous intent was even stronger than before. There was no feud between him and Chen Shuaibin. The most direct conflict was when he saved Feng Qi, but at this moment, Chen Shuaibin's murderous intent was even stronger than when he killed Feng Qi. His desire to kill Nye Tian was more urgent than killing Feng Qi. At this moment, Chen Shuaibin let out a low roar and moved. The waterfall saber in his hand slashed down fiercely. Suddenly, an overbearing saber intent burst out, causing the void to tremble. A magnificent saber shadow released a boundless aura and pressed down on Nye Tian. All of a sudden, Nye Tian felt a slight tightness in his chest. The space around him seemed to have become heavy, making him feel as if he couldn't breathe. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. Immediately, he reacted. 9 bone-eroding soul shackling chains shot out at the same time. Like 9 raging dragons, they collided with the huge saber shadow. Boom, boom, boom. In the void, terrifying shockwaves surged. The space trembled slightly as if it was going to collapse at any time. One had to admit that Chen Shuaibin's saber intent was indeed vigorous and extremely terrifying. Even if Nye Tian used the 9 bone-eroding soul shackling chains to block it, he could only withstand a few blows. Bang! In the next moment, Nye Tian felt a strong force pressing down on him. Immediately, he was sent flying. Bang! His figure collided with a huge tree that was a few meters thick, smashing through it. Nye Tian! Feng Qi's eyes trembled violently as he shouted. Nye Tian stabilized his body. A trace of blood flowed out from the corner of his mouth. His face was slightly pale as he waved his hand to indicate that he was fine. As expected of the person who alarmed the Heavenly Star Pavilion Master. The strength of his martial body far exceeds my expectations. Chen Shuaibin squinted his eyes, unable to conceal the shock in his heart. At the same time, the saber intent and murderous intent surrounding him grew stronger. Originally, he thought that Nie Tian was just a small fry. Only now did he realize that Nie Tian was the real person he wanted to kill. This guy is too strong. With my current strength, it's hard for me to fight against him. Nie Tian's eyes were fixed on Chen Shuaibin. He did not dare to be careless. Earlier, he'd fought Ji Chen, a half-saint. Although he had defeated Ji Chen in the end, he couldn't help but feel that he was trying to take advantage of others. At this moment, he was facing Chen Shuaibin, who was far stronger than Ji Chen. More importantly, the space in the Holy Soul Valley was too strange. Not only did it suppress his strength, but it also prevented him from using star essence stones. Without the power of the stars and the star heaven slash, Nie Tian's battle prowess was halved. Even though he had the bone-eroding soul shackling chains, he couldn't fight Chen Shuaibin head-on. Are you afraid? Chen Shuaibin looked at Nie Tian and sneered. Then, the saber aura around his body suddenly surged, and the bucking water saber was suddenly displayed. The majestic saber intent exploded in the air with the most violent power, and the sound of raging waves beating on the shore could be heard in the air. Nie Tian's eyes narrowed when he felt the boundless saber intent pressing down on him. Chen Shuaibin was a water attribute saber artist. He seemed to have cultivated a saber art that was known for its forcefulness. Combined with his water attribute strength, the power that erupted in an instant was extremely terrifying. Boom! At this critical moment, Nie Tian's body shook. Dragon Qi was released from his body, and the surrounding space shook under the impact of the Dragon Qi. Roar! Immediately after, a giant crimson dragon appeared, roaring angrily. Its body tumbled out, rushing towards the frightening and violent saber waves. Chen Shuaibin frowned when he saw this scene. Then, he sneered and said, "Boy, it seems that I've underestimated you." He didn't expect that Nie Tian could release such a violent dragon qi when he was being suppressed. Against the current, 9,000 slashes. At this moment, Chen Shuaibin's figure shot up into the sky. He stood tall in the sky, and his body was surging with saber intent. He looked like a saber god. Boom! The against-the-current saber in his hand slashed down crazily. Then, the space shook and the sky was filled with saber shadows. The momentum was shocking, like a landslide and a tsunami, shaking the earth. Nie Tian's eyes narrowed slightly, and his expression suddenly changed. Chen Shuaibin's strength was beyond his expectations. Bang bang bang! The next moment, countless saber shadows fell like a sky full of arrows, and fell on the body of the giant red dragon. Roar! In the blink of an eye, countless cracks appeared all over the crimson dragon's body. Its huge body instantly became shaky, and it let out a tragic howl towards the sky. Boy, so what if you're talented? In front of me, only death awaits you. Chen Shuaibin laughed loudly, and he was insufferably arrogant. Nie Tian's body shook slightly, and blood kept flowing out of the corner of his mouth. Finally, the giant red dragon could no longer hold on, and it suddenly collapsed, turning into endless dragon qi and dissipating. The difference in strength between him and Chen Shuaibin was too great. In front of Chen Shuaibin, he had almost no strength to fight back. The restrictive formation of the Holy Soul Valley was extremely strong. Nie Tian currently only had the strength of a heavenly emperor, while Chen Shuaibin should have the strength of a lower celestial. This kind of gap was too big, and no talent or perseverance could make up for it. Nie Tian. At this moment, Si Xiaoya's beautiful eyes trembled slightly, and she couldn't hide the worry on her face. But she wasn't in good condition, and most importantly, she couldn't use the scar of the heavenly Tao, so she couldn't help Nie Tian at all. At this moment, Feng Qi was also seriously injured, so he could only watch from the side. Whether or not he could defeat Chen Shuaibin depended on Nie Tian. Bang bang bang. In midair, Nie Tian's figure kept retreating under the impact of the saber shadows that filled the sky. The golden sky of yellow armor around his body was about to collapse. If the golden sky of yellow armor broke, the saber shadows would directly attack his martial body, and he would definitely not be able to withstand it. Nie Tian, do you know that your life is very valuable? At this moment, Chen Shuaibin sneered and said arrogantly, You killed Tian Zhuowen, so someone will pay a drop of holy qi liquid to take your life. Nie Tian's eyes suddenly narrowed when he heard Chen Shuaibin's words. At this moment, he suddenly understood why Chen Shuaibin's killing intent suddenly became so strong after knowing his identity. It seemed that someone had paid a high price to buy Nie Tian's life. When Ji Chen killed Nie Tian, Tian Zhuowen paid half a drop of holy qi liquid. Now, Chen Shuaibin killed Nie Tian, and the reward was a drop of holy qi liquid. As expected, Nie Tian's life was getting more and more valuable. Bang! At this moment, the golden sky of yellow armor around Nie Tian's body finally couldn't take it anymore, and with a loud bang, it shattered. Go to hell! At the same time, Chen Shuaibin's eyes flickered, and then he moved his body and slashed out again with the bucking water saber. The terrifying saber intent in the void suddenly condensed and turned into a huge saber shadow that was more than 1,000 meters long. Like a violent waterfall, it fell from the sky and pressed down on Nie Tian crazily. Chapter 2744. A desperate counterattack. Boom! As Chen Shuaibin slashed down with his saber, the ferocious saber momentum surged in the air. A saber ripple visible to the naked eye appeared and suddenly bloomed, spreading in all directions. Watch out! Si Xiaoye and Feng Qi's eyes flickered as they sensed the powerful saber aura, and both of them cried out in alarm. At that moment, they felt that the saber aura was unprecedentedly powerful. Chen Shuaibin was obviously going to kill Nie Tian with one slash. Could Nie Tian withstand this slash? In midair, Nie Tian's martial body had already been completely exposed. One blade shadow after another directly hit his body, causing him to be unable to stabilize his body. At that moment, he was almost in a desperate situation. Ha ha ha, Nie Tian, you're dead. Chen Shuaibin laughed wildly as if he could already see the scene of Nie Tian being devoured by the saber shadows. In a hopeless situation, Nie Tian's eyes darkened. There was not fear in his eyes, but determination to fight. He was able to come this far from the 3,000 small worlds not only because of his strength and talent, but also because of his unyielding and fearless ambition. Even if he was in a hopeless situation, he still wanted to fight to the death. Soul-severing seal, open! In an instant, Nie Tian's eyes focused and he formed a seal with his hands. Rays of golden light appeared and shot up into the sky, quickly sweeping away the saber shadows around him. His figure instantly stabilized, and the corners of his mouth curled up into a cold smile. My friends, it's time for you to show up. Then, he murmured, and with a thought, 2 rays of light were released from the 9 superbs. 2 giant beasts appeared beside him. One was like a golden flame, and the other was like a black and white dragon. They were the Golden Leo and the Pishio. The sudden scene made Chen Shuaibin frown, and his eyes trembled uncontrollably. Feng Qi and Si Xiaoye were stunned at the same time. They did not expect Nie Tian to have these 2 fellows with him. Roar! Roar! In the next moment, the Golden Lion and the Pai Xiu roared in anger. Then, their bodies moved and a violent aura was released from their bodies. They rushed towards the blade in the sky. They wanted to use their powerful bodies to resist Chen Shuaibin's killing blow. At the same time, Nie Tian's eyes also trembled. Then, he took a step forward and directly rushed over with the momentum of the Golden Leo and Pai Xiu. The 2 giant beasts, one on the left and one on the right, were like 2 guards, blocking Nie Tian's side. Boom! Boom! Immediately after, the tyrannical shadow of the blade fell, directly bombarding the golden lion and the Pishio. The air rumbled, as if the space suddenly stopped at this moment. Roar! Roar! Jin Tu and Pai Xiu let out a violent roar at the same time, and joined forces to block Chen Shuibin's killing blow with their beast bodies. Chen Shuibin's eyes narrowed when he saw this. He was shocked. His swallowing waves cutting the sky was blocked by the two mythological beasts. At this moment, Nie Tian's figure suddenly appeared, with a cold smile on his face. You! Chen Shuibin's eyes shrank. Obviously, he did not expect that Nie Tian would appear at this time. Swish! Nie Tian did not speak at all. His eyes darkened, and the 9 bone-eroding soul-shackling chains merged together and whistled out, like an arrow leaving the bow, extremely fierce. Chen Shuibin suddenly reacted, and the against-the-current saber in his hand directly slashed out, but he was still a step too late. Puff! The bone-eroding soul-shackling chains fell directly, and the strange power turned into an air-breaking force, directly penetrating Chen Shuibin's shoulder. Chen Shuibin screamed, and his figure directly flew out, leaving a dripping blood trail in the air. Bang! At the same time, a stream of knife essence fell and hit Nie Tian. After a muffled sound, his figure also flew out. Nie Tian and Chen Shuibin's figures stabilized at the same time. But the two of them were in completely different states. Nie Tian's whole body was dripping with blood, and there were countless frightening wounds all over his body. It looked like he was seriously injured. But Chen Shuibin only seemed to be injured in the shoulder, and he did not seem to be seriously injured. On the other side, the Golden Leo and the Pishio were also seriously injured under the bombardment of the tyrannical saber. On their huge bodies, there was a huge wound that was more than 10 meters long, and blood kept spurting out. It was extremely tragic. The two great divine beasts forcibly blocked Chen Shuibin's saber and paid an extremely heavy price. In the Holy Soul Valley, it was not only the martial artists whose strength was suppressed, even the Golden Leo and the Pishio's strength was suppressed. But fortunately, this was in the Holy Soul Valley. Under normal circumstances, the Golden Leo and the Pishio would not be able to block Chen Shuibin's saber at all, and they would definitely be killed. Nie Tian, your means indeed exceeded my expectations, but this does not change the result at all. Today you will still die. Chen Shuibin stabilized his body, a pair of eyes cold stared at Nie Tian, and said in a deep voice. His shoulder was only injured by Nie Tian, and it was not fatal. For a martial artist of his strength, having his shoulder pierced was only a small injury. Is that so? Nie Tianling replied coldly, an extremely cold smile on his lips. Chen Shuibin's eyes focused, and immediately felt that something was wrong, and his expression changed. He suddenly felt a strange pain coming from the wound on his shoulder, as if thousands of ants were madly devouring his body, and even his divine sense felt threatened. You! At this moment, Chen Shuibin finally realized that the wound that Nie Tian left on his body was strange. Your body was pierced by my bone-eroding soul-shackling chains, and the bone-eroding soul-shackling chi has invaded your martial body. If you are unable to force the soul-shackling chi out of your martial body within half a day, you will die for sure. The corner of Nie Tian's lips curled up, and he said with a cold smile. Chen Shuibin's eyes widened when he heard his words, and his face displayed an unconcealable look of terror. Following this, he tried to unleash his force to attack again, but he realized that the more he tried to circulate his primary meridians, the more violent the soul-shackling chi in his body became. If you attack now, it will only worsen the effects of the soul-shackling chi. You better think carefully. Nie Tianling let out a cold smile and threatened him. You despicable! Chen Shuibin's eyes darkened, and he clenched his fists tightly. He could feel the terrifying soul-shackling chi wreaking havoc in his body. If he was unable to force the force out in time, he would really die at the hands of Nie Tian. Despicable, that's my specialty. Nie Tianling let out a cold grin, and his eyes were filled with murderous intent. Brat, we'll see. Chen Shuaibin could feel the soul shackling qi in his body becoming more active, and did not dare to delay any further. He let out a low growl, and with a flicker, he left the scene. If he were to stay and attack, he might not be able to kill Nie Tian, but he would definitely die to the soul shackling qi. Therefore, he did not dare to take the risk. Phew! Watching Chen Shuaibin's figure disappear, Nie Tian let out a long breath of turbid air, and his tensed nerves immediately relaxed. It was really dangerous just now, and Chen Shuaibin was finally scared away by him. Nie Tian opened the 9 extremities, let the golden lion and Pishu return, and then descended. At this moment, his face was very pale, and his breath was very weak. Nie Tian, are you all right? Feng Qi saw the situation and hurried to Nie Tian's side, and asked anxiously. Nie Tian waved his hand slightly, and forced a smile on his face.